Hello there, Atheist Junior here, your friend and humble narrator, and I'm coming to you guys with a brand new live stream. Just adjusting my mic here. I'm going to be looking at a debate from one of the most popular atheist content creators on YouTube versus one of the most popular right-wing podcast hosts, Ben Shapiro. And so, yeah, the debate is about, is religion good for society? Well, in my opinion, no, but that's what a debate is for, right? But yeah, let's get into it.
Today, we are talking about a very interesting topic. The question is religion good or bad for society?
Bad.
And I've been joined by two very dapper chaps, Ben Shapiro and Alex O'Connor, who most of you maybe, will be completely aware of. We're going to have a very substantive conversation. I'm going to introduce them first. I'm going to give a little summary on who they are, and stop me if you've heard this before. So Ben Shapiro is a prominent American conservative political commentator and columnist. Okay, so far?
So far, so good.
A graduate in political science from UCLA and the Harvard Law School, Ben has authored over a dozen books, including the #1 New York Times bestseller, The Right Side of History: How Reason and Moral Purpose Made the West Great. He is co-founder and editor emeritus of The Daily Wire and host of the aptly titled Ben Shapiro Show, which in 2021 was ranked in the top 10 most listened to Apple podcasts. He also has a YouTube channel with over 6 million subscribers.
I'm sorry, but I just have to say, I think the West had a little bit of an advantage considering colonialism and the fact that they enslaved a bunch of other nations in order to reach the level of power they had to be called great, but that's a whole other discussion.
Kudos to you, sir. Joining Ben today is Alex O'Connor. Alex O'Connor is a YouTuber and host of the Within Reason podcast, a philosophy platform designed to present philosophical discussions in an accessible format. A graduate of philosophy and theology from St John's College, Oxford University, he is also an international public speaker and debater, having defended his philosophical convictions against a wide range of experts across multiple continents, and whose online video material has been viewed more than 70 million times. Is that true?
It might be more now, actually, depending on
more than 70 million times.
That was written.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it's great to have you both. Thank you both for taking the time. And for both of you, I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller. So hopefully we're going to have a lot of good stuff to say. We're talking about religion and society and how they interconnect. And we want to know, really, and I'd like to get this settled once and for all at the end of this conversation so nobody else ever has to discuss it if we can. Is religion good for society? Can a society hold together if there are no underlying beliefs that everybody shares? And we're going to be exploring what both of you believe are the most important principles undergirding any civilization. What are the foundations of morality and ethics based on? So, without further ado, let's start. I'm not going to go into backstory too much because most people will be aware of who you are, and there'll be a lot of fanboys and girls out there watching. But let's talk about something that, Ben, you have spoken on, and Alex, you have responded to.
Is this a live chat with a bunch of atheists? It will be pretty soon, depending on if anybody shows up. I know it's a little bit late, at least in my time zone.
To this idea of the atheist delusion. Ben, could you sort of concisely, if you can, talk about what you mean by the atheist delusion?
Sure. So I should start off by saying I don't actually think that it's possible to prove the existence of God. I'm also not a believer that you can disprove the existence of God. I don't think that logical argumentation is going to get you there one way or another. And so I'm not going to try and do that with Alex today, because I think that if people would have been able to provide dispositive proofs, then people would believe them. And if people were able to provide dispositive proofs that God does not exist, then people would be more apt to believe those as well.
I don't know if I want to call this a cop-out, but it seems like a little bit of a cop-out because this is not the subject of the debate. So I think for the purposes of the question being asked, in the debate topic, it's irrelevant whether or not you can prove or disprove whether God exists. The point is that people believe that God does exist, and they believe that religion, at least we're talking about, I assume that this debate is centering on Christianity and centering on the United States or Western society. The point is that people think that the claims made in the religious text of the Bible are true, and they live their life by those claims. And there are a lot of politicians among that group who make legislature based on the belief that those claims are true. And that's the point.
What I think is an atheist delusion is that it is possible to live ideologically purely in a way that does not rely on fundamental faith principles. When I say faith principles, I'm not going to make the claim that those faith principles are direct from Sinai or that those faith principles require the New Testament, for example. I'm going to make the claim that there are a bunch of principles upon which we base ourselves that are external to what we know about nature and evolutionary biology, and that many of the things that Alex does in his daily life, for example, are going to be things that rely on principles that are external to a philosophy that would assume a lack of the supernatural, a lack of the extra natural. So some of those principles, for example, are free will. So every day we get up, we believe, virtually all of us, whether we say we believe it or not, we actually act in ways that betray the idea that we believe that we have control over our own actions, at least to a certain extent, and that control makes a difference in the world. And that's what gives us purpose. It's what allows us to wake up in the morning and make the decision to do what we believe is right or what we believe is wrong. That the principles of right and wrong are external to evolutionary biology. So both of these principles that I've mentioned already, free will, right and wrong, these come from a language that is external to the Darwinian language of evolutionary biology. If you're talking about free will, there is nothing in nature that suggests the ability to make a decision free of environment and genetics in combination in some sort. The same thing is true of right and wrong, the idea that there is a right and there is a moral wrong that we can reason our way to. Another principle that I think that you're obviously very big on, it's something that you rely on all the time, your entire podcast is based on the idea of reason. These ideas do not exist in the context of a purely materialist atheist universe. Now, I'm not going to make the claim that I can prove that it's God who's behind those things, because one of the principles of faith belief is that I don't understand God. So for people who don't believe in God, that's an easy way out, right? That's an easy way out.
Yes, it's quite convenient for you.
For people like me, because I say, well, I don't have to explain the relationship between God and free will, because frankly, I don't fully understand God. But that's not really that's not really an open window. That's just part of pretty much all faith systems, is that if my mind were the mind of God, then I would either be God or God would not exist, one of the two things. So the idea that reason makes a difference in our lives, that we can reason our way to propositions, and that's more than just saying a few magic words and that's setting off a few neurons in somebody else's brain in a naturalistic way, that there actually is principles of truth, another concept that comes from the extra natural world, that these principles exist. So far I've mentioned free will, good, right and wrong, reason, and truth, right? All things that we consider extremely key in our daily lives and that Alex considers key in what he does. It's, I assume, why you get up every morning, or at least why you...
This is 100% a gish gallop. He just admitted that he brought up a bunch of topics which he knows, both of them know, could easily be discussed at length. But he just keeps going on because he's like obfuscating. He's circling the wagons to make his actual point about whether or not religion is good for society or not.
Feel you get up every morning, you know, what gets you up to do your podcast? It's because you want to say things that you believe are reasonable, are going to convince people to act in a better way, or I assume not a worse way, that get people to change their lives in some way in a self-motivated fashion. That's not merely in a sort of Pavlovian response to circumstance and environment. So if I were going to talk about the atheist delusion, that's what I would suggest is the delusion, that an atheist can use terminology that is drawn from a world that is external to atheism for itself. And again, that's not an argument for God even. That's just an argument against atheism. Again, I think the arguments against God are...
That's not an argument for God. That's an argument against atheism. Those seem like they're mutually exclusive, but I don't know. That's just me. Rembrandt 97.2 says, Alex should have never debated an androgynous chipmunk. Do you mean that Ben Shapiro is the androgynous chipmunk, or should he not debate any androgynous chipmunks? And I disagree. I think that atheists should take all comers. If you're gonna be in the public debate space, I think you should take all comers to within reason. You know what I mean? Maybe except for a Matt Dillahunty situation where, you know, if you guys remember the debate that Matt Dillahunty walked out on, and I'm not a fan of Matt Dillahunty. Me and him have not been friends. But I totally agreed with the decision he made to just leave that debate because that guy was a dick.
Are fairly compelling, and I think the arguments against atheism are fairly compelling. This is one of the things that I've said to Sam Harris, and I think that the difference is that most people who believe in God have expressed doubts, and a lot of people who are atheists tend to be more religious in this way than many of the people who are God believers.
Well,
what does that mean? Let me rewind that.
Can use terminology that is drawn from a world that is external to atheism.
It's not external. There's not a reality that exists externally from an atheist reality. I don't know what that means.
For itself. And again, that's not an argument for God even. That's just an argument against atheism. Again, I think the arguments against God are fairly compelling, and I think the arguments against atheism are fairly compelling. This is one of the things that I've said to Sam Harris. And I think that the difference is that most people who believe in God have expressed doubts, and a lot of people who are atheists tend to be more religious in this way than many of the people who are God believers.
Well, something's certain. We don't do cold opens or soft starts here on the big conversation. Alex.
Well,
Thank you. This is not your podcast, Ben. Geez.
I am glad to begin on a point of agreement with you, Ben, that yes, if there is no God, there is no free will. But I think that's because of the truth of the latter of those statements. That I suppose the biggest criticism that I made of you in a video response that I made to the atheist delusion, and this show does seem to have an extraordinary capacity for putting me face to face with people that I've been talking smack about online. So thanks again.
By the way, I should say it's a great video, and everybody should watch it if they haven't.
Well, I'm going to put that in the description. I think that glowing endorsement. The principal disagreement that I think I had with you, Ben, is that there was a subtle or not so subtle implication in my view that yes, with no God there's no free will, but somehow having God can solve this problem. I mean, you said a moment ago that you don't think you can establish God's existence through reason alone, but assuming that you do believe in the existence of free will, you think it's a real thing that you have.
Yes.
And simultaneously saying that if there is no God, then free will makes no sense.
Yes.
That does read to me like an argument for God's existence, such that in order to either say that there is free will, in order to say that there is free will, one must believe in God. And that does strike me as an argument for God's existence.
I mean, to slightly curve that, or to kind of sand off the rough edges there, I would say that the argument I made is an argument for something extra natural.
Sure.
Now, you can call that God or not God, but the thing that I'm making the argument for is that you cannot get from a materialist Darwinist universe to free will. That is not possible. So I know that the way you solve that is that you say that there is no free will.
That's right.
And what I'm saying to you is you don't act that way.
What I always said, maybe I should give my opinion about this. I think that humans have the illusion of free will. And for me, that's good enough because I'm a pragmatist and a naturalist. And I go by what my senses, however flawed, tell me. And my senses tell me that I have a reasonable amount of control over my own actions. Now, there are things I don't have control over, like I can't control my hormonal responses or my emotional responses. Maybe some people say that they can control their own emotions. Maybe you can to some degree, but you can't stop yourself from getting angry. If something really pisses you off, it's going to make you mad. You could stop yourself from, like, I don't know, throwing something across the room, but there are some people who apparently can't do that, you know? So I don't think I agree with either of them, that free will exists absolutely, or that it just doesn't exist. I think that we have the illusion of it. You could say that it doesn't exist, but I think that it seems like it exists. So that's good enough for the functionality that we need from free will, right? So what's the difference?
I hear this all the time. People say, look, you may say there's no free will, but you don't act as though that's the case. I suppose that I'm just confused as to what it would look like for somebody to act as if they believe there was no free will. I mean, the very argument that there is no free will that I subscribe to, at least one of the various forms that it takes, is a sort of Schopenhauerian view that you can do as you will, you just can't will what you will. And that you are essentially just a biological machine reacting to its to its internal and evolutionary drives. That's what's happening. Now, call that nihilistic if you like, that's a separate question, but as to the question of how this would make one act, the idea that this might cause us to sort of lay around in bed all day or something, the very mechanism that I think is responsible for eliminating the possibility of free will, that is, the drives that make people do what they do, like I say, do exactly that. Make people do what they do. They make them get out of bed in the morning. Why do you get out of bed and go and make your breakfast if there's no free will? So you go and get breakfast because there's no free will and something is driving you to do that that's outside of your control.
For sure.
Which is a biological response, which would be hunger, I'm assuming. Is that his argument?
To get back to the nihilism point, which you kind of put aside, so that means that this conversation is essentially worthless in any sort of real sense. I mean, effectively, we were driven here by evolutionary biology and environment to have this conversation. Everybody who's watching this is driven by evolutionary biology and environment to have a particular reaction to that thing, and ever round the cycle goes. That seems like a very purposeless life. Maybe again, I'm drawing from a realm that is not evolutionarily biologically connected. The word purpose is really, teleology obviously has been taken out of the realm of science pretty thoroughly. But
I just like how the guy who claims to be a Orthodox Jew and apparently believes all the stuff in Genesis to be true is bringing up evolution all the time. Like, I just think it's kind of funny. It's a misnomer, or it's a weird juxtaposition
by atheists and by many people in the sciences. Although I would argue that, again, most scientists speak in the realm of teleology literally all the time, and they're borrowing language from the language of teleology, even when they're describing functions of particular body parts. Right, the heart pumps blood in order to keep you alive. Right, they're constantly using language that's teleological in nature. The real question that I have, and this is what goes to the question that you were asking at the beginning, before the sort of pre-question question, which was the good of religion to society. One of those goods is people believing that their free will matters, and this actually is a useful thing. So I believe that it is deeply important for people in society to believe that they have the capacity to change themselves and to make different decisions than what biology would drive them to do. So you say, well, it's biology that drives you to get out of bed in the morning, which is almost Calvinist in sort of the way that it's described, right? It's like you're predestined to get out of bed in the morning, so thus you get out of bed in the morning. But the reality is,
not if you're clinically depressed,
is that we are constantly making decisions as though those decisions make a difference in the universe. And what social science actually does tend to show is that when people believe that they have control over their own actions, that when they believe that they're capable of changing the way that they live, they do make those changes with more alacrity and in better directions than if they don't believe that. If people tend to believe in a deterministic universe, they do act worse. So it may work. This is going to be sort of Straussian in its implications, but that may work for you. You're a very high IQ individual who can somehow reconcile the idea of living a very purposeful life with the idea that actually there's no purpose to anything. But
does anybody else get the vibe that Ben Shapiro is trying to impress Alex here? Like, is it just me? Like, he seems to be trying really hard to be like, I know about philosophy, guys. I can name drop teleology and name drop these different philosophers.
The vast majority of people, that is not actually how they live. And I would suggest that even in your daily life, you don't get out of bed in the morning thinking, man, my biology is driving me this morning to get on the bike, have a great day, the sun is shining. That's my biology doing this. And I don't think that most people who live purposeful lives, even if they believe that everything they're doing is predetermined by the world around them, by their own biology, I don't believe they actually feel that. They have to engage in what they themselves would term an illusion in order to feel a sense of purpose and meaning in their lives.
Of course, but that's what the evolutionary process, in my view, in my worldview, I should say, has done so well, is provide precisely that illusion. I mean, it's not as that, I mean, you say, look, you don't get out of bed in the morning thinking, gosh, look at my biological
My neurons
drive.
are firing, yeah.
Of course not, because if I did, then the whole evolutionary purpose that this illusion serves would fall away. I mean, you say that this is a fairly purposeless life, and perhaps the implication is that it's a bit of a depressing one. I didn't come here to inspire optimism in people. I just think it is in fact the case.
By the way.
It is in fact the case that free will doesn't exist, and we may feel very nihilistic towards that, but as a wise man once said, facts don't care about your feelings.
Okay, I'm going to read this quote from Rembrandt. It says, "Ben, those who can be convinced of absurdities can be convinced to commit atrocities." Voltaire. That's a good quote. Not as good as Ben's quote, though, right?
And I will say that the argument against free will, in my view, is based upon something broader than just scientific analysis or empirical research. Rather, we can build an argument, I think, from a law of logic, the proposition that P must either be true or false, and it can't be both, it can't be neither. It has to be one or the other. Now, this law of the excluded middle, one of the foundational precepts of philosophy, we can simply ask a question of any kind of mental activity, and this will be regardless of whether it's material or immaterial. That's what makes this a crucial argument, and an important one, a pertinent one, is that you can ask of that mental activity, is it determined or is it not? That is it determined by anything else, or is it completely undetermined by anything? If it's undetermined by anything, then it's random, and you're by definition not in control of that which is random. If it's determined by something, then it's either determined by something further inside your mind, or inside your brain, or indeed inside your soul, or it's determined by something external to your brain. If it's determined by something external to yourself, I should say yourself rather than your brain here to rid this conversation of any implicit materialism, exterior to yourself, if that's what's determining the action, then clearly you're not in ultimate control of that action. If it's something inside of yourself somewhere, then all you do is push the problem back and you ask the question again, is that thing determined or is it indeterminate? So indeterminate, it's random. Determined, you keep going back until you either terminate in something outside of the self, something or I suppose something undetermined and therefore random, either of which you are completely out of control in. If you say that it terminates in something like a soul, people like to do this. They say, well, look, with a religious philosophy, we have the benefit of introducing a soul. That doesn't solve anything. Because you still need to, it's not a matter of having to explain the mechanism by which the soul brings about actions. That may well be a mystery. But if it is the case that whatever it is that's doing that is either determined or it's not, and that if it's not, it's random and therefore out of your control, and that if it is, it ultimately terminates in something outside of yourself or something random, and both of which are out of your control, free will cannot exist.
Well,
so I would be careful.
That argument does rely on the complete deconstruction of the self. Right? I mean, you're using the term self in this argument.
This is where the moderator needs to step in and be like, guys, the topic of the debate is religion good for society or bad? Is religion good or bad for society? Can we kind of get things back on topic here?
In, I think, a couple of different ways. You're saying something outside yourself, but then you're breaking down the self into a bunch of separate components as though the self is a computer. Right? As though if you took the self and you broke it down into a machine, and there's like there's the microchip, and you've got the processor, you got all these different parts of it. So it has to be coming from here, or it has to be coming from here. But I think the very idea that we have of ourselves as selves is as a deciding being. And so the attempt to carve that down into, so which parts of the deciding being, that is an avoidance strategy. So I don't think that the argument quite holds.
Well, if we can call the self just a deciding being,
call it a deciding being,
then that sort of fundamental assumption that we make about the nature of the self, I don't think is going to be incompatible with atheism.
How so?
Because we're talking about what the self is here. I mean, atheists believe in the self. Everybody believes in the self.
Well, no, that's not. I mean, that I find difficult to believe. Why would an atheist believe in the self? The self.
Because self-actualization. Because why would they not? Humans have a sense of self, and most atheists, like Alex, have an interest in philosophy, and to have even the most baseline interest or knowledge of philosophy, I think you have to either agree with or subscribe to what Descartes said, which is, I think therefore I am. That's believing in the self. Thank you. Yeah, I love Metal Gear Solid. I love the art of Yoji Shinkawa. He's one of my favorite artists, so thank you for noticing that.
This is a series of non-deciding mechanisms, as you've described. I see that your view of the self is an atheist view of the self, a meatball wandering through space, as I've put it somewhat colorfully. The sort of Spinoza idea that you're a stone that's been thrown, and you can comprehend that you've been thrown, but you're a stone that's been thrown, and that's just the way that it is. Why would there be in atheist philosophy such a thing as a deciding self? The deciding self, the deciding being, is external to the idea of an evolutionary cause, because the very word deciding suggests uncaused decision making, and you've just excluded it through your own philosophy.
Uncaused decision making, I suppose, is a concept that I think is unintelligible, and therefore, if there is an unintelligibility of the self on atheism, I suppose the thrust of the criticism that I made to essentially every point you made in that video, except for the argument from motion, is that what you're saying to me, if it applies to atheism, I think simultaneously applies to theism as well.
How so?
An uncaused decision. I mean, what is the process by which a decision is made?
But now you're.
You know what the really funny thing is about a religious person like Ben talking about atheists not believing that they have a self, is that atheists actually, or theists, pray to God, right? Theists get messages or answers from God, but that's just their own mind. It's just you, you know, that is yourself. You're answering yourself. You're asking yourself, self or God, what should I do? It's just your own conscience. Why is that word so hard to pronounce? Conscience. It's your own conscience, if you have one, which some religious people seem to lack one. But it's just them. It's just your own brain. Like, I love the quote. I forget exactly how he said it, but Stephen Colbert, who is a devout Catholic, one time on his show was saying that, you know, it sure would be depressing if every time I prayed, it was really just me talking to no one. I hate to break it to you.
But now you're falling into the same sort of argument that I excluded at the beginning, which was, I said that the beauty of religion is that there's a bunch of stuff I don't understand. So I can't explain to you how the uncaused self makes decisions.
Well, then I can't explain to you how the uncaused self exists on an atheistic
But you have a
framework.
burden and I don't. Meaning that
I don't think that's the case.
You do, though. I mean, the simple fact is that you are the one who's claiming that a reasonable materialist universe is the cause of all. And so if that's the case, you do have to explain the mechanism in a way that I certainly do not. My entire philosophy rests on the positing of an entire realm of things I don't understand in terms of their interaction with the world. Now, as I said at the very beginning, that leaves me a giant escape hatch. I'm not going to pretend that that's not a giant escape hatch. It acts in practice as a giant escape hatch. It also tends to act as a fundamental principle of faith, right? Again, in every moral realm, right? When we get to the problem of good and evil, right? One of the big questions is, well, how can God allow evil to take place in the world? And the fundamental religious answer, as it has been for thousands of years, is my mind is not God's, which is a giant escape hatch. It also happens to be true from a religious point of view.
So if I may, that there are two sort of escape hatches here. There are two appeals to mystery going on here. And it seems to me that what you're saying is something along the lines of my simple appeal to mystery here is disallowed in the way that you're allowed to appeal to this mystery because I'm the one making the claim. I think that
not because I'm the one making the claim, but because
I'm the one with the burden.
In
the context of this discussion,
sorry, I'm missing the who's the you and the who's the I in
yes.
a sense, but yes.
I see what you mean. I'm speaking for myself there.
Sorry.
If in the context of this discussion, this began the subject which I think is the first one you bring up in this video, free will. Here's this thing that I think exists, and on the basis of its existence, think entails the existence of a God, or at least points to the existence of a God. I shouldn't say entail. And then when I say that I don't think that the concept of free will is intelligible, and you say, well, how is it intelligible on atheism? And I say, I'm not sure it is, but it's not on theism either. And you say, well, there's my escape hatch. I can appeal to mystery. I don't think the burden is on me there. I think you were the one who's making the claim that free will does exist, that there is this mysterious property of the universe
actually, that's not
escapes.
No, that is true. He just made a really good point. I think Alex just made the first really good point of this whole debate. And I think Ben is trying to use his escape hatch here.
This determined or indetermined dichotomy. And then when I say that this is unintelligible to me and based on what I see to be fundamentally appeal to a law of logic, suddenly I'm the one making the claim. I'm the one with the burden who has to do the proving.
No, the actual claim that I originally made, if you recall, was a conditional claim. Mm-hmm. I did not claim free will exists, therefore God. I claimed if you
I think you kind of did.
believe free will exists, it cannot exist in a materialist universe. Now, you say, okay, fine, it doesn't exist in a materialist universe. I don't believe in free will.
Yes.
That's fine. That's totally plausible. As I said right at the top here, I'm not going to prove to you that God exists today. What I am going to say is that the vast majority of people throughout nearly all of human history have believed there is a thing called a self. It is a deciding self that makes these decisions. If you are a person who believes that, you're right. It can't exist in your world. So I'm not saying that it does exist. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're totally right. And all of this is just a series of chemical firings. That's quite plausible. That's fine. What I have said, and this is the argument that hasn't yet been rebutted, is that society does require an extraordinary number of people to believe that they are capable of making decisions for the good or for the bad. Because, again, not everybody is you. Not everybody is capable of waking up in the morning, putting one half of their brain on hold, the side that says what I'm doing today doesn't matter, and we are all going to wind up in the cosmic nothingness of space anyway, and the sun's going to explode and eat the earth. Most people don't function that way. And so a functional society, a society that actually works, relies on people actually believing that their fate is in their hands. And the way that people tend to understand that on a day-to-day level is, I get up in the morning and I make a decision whether I'm taking my kids to school today. I get up in the morning and I decide whether I'm giving charity today. I get up in the morning and I decide whether to go to a job today. Because the truth is that for a huge number of people, and I would say this is true for not virtually all, many, 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 I would say the majority of people, if they were informed since the time they were small that their decision-making process does not exist, there is no decision to be made. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Those decisions have no moral weight in the universe because the universe has no moral weight. There is no way to create a functional society on the basis of these premises. There may be a Platonic world where philosophers can think about this in the gardens of their imagination and feel great about it. But that's not actually how society functions, not for children, not for teenagers, not for adults.
Yes. And we're going to go on and talk about that in the second section. I had free will to ask any of the questions I've had written down here, but I just didn't want to. I didn't want to stop either of you. It's been breathless and captivating. I'm sure you'll agree. Before we go to our first break, we are going to go on and talk about society and how morality undergirds society and civilization.
May I just say, just I know we're coming to the end of the section, just to close off this moment, that if people listening agree with me that free will in fact doesn't exist, and simultaneously agree with you that free will is somehow necessary for the upkeep of civilization, then I would simply ask them to consider who's relying on the delusion here, Yeah. And I don't mean that as an insult, but you see what I'm saying, right?
I don't know if either debate participant has done a good job at establishing why they have the belief about free will that they seem to posit. The people in the chat, you'll have to let me know if I've missed something or if you agree, because I don't know why Alex says, I haven't seen enough of his videos to know why he thinks free will doesn't exist. And with Ben, I don't think he did a good job of explaining his position about it either. Just because choices are determined doesn't mean they aren't choices. Well, this is why I go back to having the illusion of free will. If you've ever played Half-Life, I think the whole narrative of that game is about somebody having the illusion of choice, right? Because at the end of the game, the G-Man says that he's going to offer you a job, and you can either choose to do what he says, or he basically kills you. He teleports you in front of a bunch of aliens that are going to murder you. So it's the illusion of choice. That's why the fact that the game is so linear and that you start out the game on a tram, on a rail, and there is literally a chapter called On a Rail, it's actually thematically relevant. And I think that there's some greater meaning to that too. I think a lot of times we have the illusion of choice, don't we? Like, we have free will, but you can't just do anything you want. We live in a society of laws. We live in a capitalist society where there's consequences for the decisions we make. And if you make a negative or a bad choice, like if you commit a crime, you'll likely be punished for it. If you don't go to work, you'll likely have difficulty or won't be able to pay your bills, and you'll suffer for that reason. So we have free will to make certain choices. Like, you can choose what wage slave job you have, or if you're lucky enough to do YouTube and actually be successful at it. But, let's keep going.
I totally agree. And so from my argument, you would be, and from your argument, I would be. Yeah. Meaning, I think that you are delusional, there's no free will, and you think I'm delusional in the sense that there is no free will, and yet I believe in it.
Yeah. Something like that,
yes.
Yeah.
So for you, Alex, just before we go to the break then, because we're trying to break it down, we've got two insane minds here, really kind of grappling, and I feel as though I've won a prize in a competition just to be here sitting with you both. To break it down for the viewers, Alex, would you say that free will is maybe, if there is no such thing as free will, is it nevertheless a helpful fiction for people, a convenient narrative that we can cling to sort of bat away despair.
Precisely
Yes.
why it evolved, in my view. I think I totally understand that, but because it evolved so strongly, I will say that we are all, if we are sort of delusory in our belief in free will. I mean, you're quite right in saying that I act as if free will exists in the sense of not constantly being aware that it doesn't. I don't wake up and do those strange morning affirmations that you mentioned into the mirror about, the sort of heat death of the universe. But,
maybe you should.
People, I think it is good to reflect on your mortality in that manner every once in a while, and it does inspire some serious thought about whether you're really taking your philosophy seriously. But I will say that the mechanism is so useful and has been so successful in embedding itself into our psyche that we cannot shake it off. So I can I can have conversations with people, as I do regularly, talking about the existence of free will, and they come away saying, you know what, that's extraordinary, maybe you're right about this. And nothing about the way they live their life changes, precisely because of the fact that the very argument I'm making relies on the assumption that we will still be driven by our drives. All I'm doing is identifying what's actually going on there, in my view. It doesn't actually change what happens or what the brain indeed does.
So the utility argument for what you're saying about free will is that the main utility in you saying these things is for people not to believe you in the end.
We are predetermined to go to a break at this point. So we're going to continue.
Okay, I'm going to read this for my own purposes. Alex O'Connor argues against the existence of free will primarily from a deterministic and naturalistic perspective. Determinism. Make sure I'm not muted. All events, including human thoughts and actions, are caused by prior events in accordance with the laws of nature. Our brains are physical systems. Brain states are caused by previous brain states plus inputs from the environment. Therefore, every decision you make is ultimately the result of prior causes you didn't choose. Okay. Lack of ultimate control. You don't choose your genes, your upbringing, or the circumstances that shaped your personality. So even if you do choose between two options, the choice arises from factors outside your control. You can do what you want, but you can't choose what you want to want, and that matters. The illusion of choice. Okay, it feels like we have free will, but that feeling could simply be a byproduct of complex cognitive processes. Neuroscience suggests decisions begin in the brain before we are consciously aware of making them. Okay, so that's what I was thinking earlier, but I didn't say it. I think me and Alex actually agree on this point. So saying that free will doesn't exist and the illusion of free will does exist, I don't think are mutually exclusive. Okay.
You're watching and listening to the big conversation from Premier Unbelievable with me, your host, Andy Kind. I've been joined today by Alex O'Connor and Ben Shapiro, and we are having a fascinating conversation about religion and whether it's good or bad for society. There's lots more to come, so we'll be back after this short break. Enjoying the conversation? Tell us who persuaded you in our survey. And if you want more from today's conversation, then register to get early access to the next show. Welcome back to the big conversation from Premier Unbelievable with me, your host, Andy Kind. Today, our topic is religion. Is it good or bad for society?
Oh, wow. That's the topic. Could have fooled me.
And I've been joined by Ben Shapiro and Alex O'Connor. And in the first section, we basically solved the problem of free will. That's done. No one need write on that ever again. So congratulations. That's another credit for you.
Yeah, I think on the delusion point, we terminated in something like I know you are, but what am I?
Correct.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And my dad can beat up your dads. So let's move on in this section to talking about another easily solved question, morality and its role in society. So, Alex, we started with Ben in the first section. Let's start with you. What for you makes an outcome good or bad? And feel free to break that down, define things as you want. And how do we determine what is good and acceptable in society?
Okay, I haven't seen this debate before, so I'm going to preempt what he says by giving the answer that I would give in this scenario, and we'll see how similar they are. So, and I'll admit I'm kind of stealing this from, oh gosh, a different atheist philosophy person that I don't recall their name, but it doesn't really matter because it's true. So a particular choice or outcome is good if it promotes the happiness, health, or well-being of others or yourself. And a particular choice is bad or immoral if it causes or promotes unnecessary pain, harm, or suffering to you or others. The key word there being unnecessary. If you're inflicting unnecessary amounts of harm to people who are considered innocent, now that's a whole rabbit trail in itself of how do you define somebody as being innocent, but that's the answer that I would give.
Here is where I may disappoint you and potentially excite Mr. Shapiro in that I don't have a good answer to that question. Okay. In that, obviously, attempts have been made for a long time to ground good outside of God. I must say that similarly to rehash the same theme, I think there are issues with grounding good in God as well. I don't think that removes the problem. I don't quite know what good is if it indeed exists. I'm quite suspicious of the concept. I think it might be another one of these unfortunately quite nihilistic evolutionary sort of illusions of a sort. I guess I ascribe to emotivism more than anything, which has sort of gone out of fashion in the past decade, but I think still has some truth to it in a sense. It's more of a philosophy of language than it is a philosophy of what good and bad actually is. What I do know, however, is that there are problems, I think, with trying to ground morality in the existence of a God, especially if it's done so on the grounds that it essentially can't be done anywhere else. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the religions of the world are false. I think that they are incorrect. That is, I don't think there really is a supernatural authority. And what that means is that the inventions of religious morality are just those, inventions, and inventions of a human mind. Now, if you have a human morality that recognizes that it is essentially a series of compromises between the history of mankind trying to get along with each other on a planet, then what happens is sometimes these ideas and these philosophies rub up against the real world, and we can adapt them as necessary. Now, there is a deep problem with this, and that is, if I meet a man who wants to kill me, or a friend, and he says that he doesn't believe in God, there's very little I can do to talk him out of that, except I can threaten him with legal sanction, I can threaten him with moral reproach, exclusion from the moral community, but there's not much more I can do. However, if a person says that he wants to kill me, and he believes that he wants to kill me because God has told him to do so, then I don't even have that minimal reproach available to me, because there is no law written by any man of any time that could ever count one iota against the dictates of the creator of the universe. Therefore, if that God in fact does not exist, and if these moralities are in fact human inventions, then what you have in the grounding of an ethical system in the dictates, allegedly, of the creator of the universe is all of the arbitrariness and subjectivity and failure and faults of nihilism and human invented morality, with all of the certainty and all of the faith and all of the unanswerability of the creator of the universe. That to me seems a dangerous cocktail that we drink.
Dude, that just blew my fucking mind. What a great argument. You know, I went, it was a couple of years ago, like probably several years ago now, that I went to an atheist convention called Faithless Forum in Austin, Texas. And Cosmic Skeptic was supposed to attend, but he couldn't. So they just beamed in a video of his, like an exclusive video they recorded for that con on the big screen in the debate hall. And this is essentially this was sort of what he was talking about in that video. So I've kind of heard this before, but the way that he worded that, I just think that's such a poignant thing that he just said. Like, wow. I'm impressed. Okay, let's keep going. That was very good.
At our peril.
So many things there, and so much that you're saying is quite brilliant. I actually thought you were going in a different direction with that last example, which I'll explain in a second. So, yeah, to start with the very beginning, obviously, the idea of right and wrong. So there are many problems with emotivism. Alistair McIntyre does a good job sort of breaking down the problems with emotivism. But the sort of idea that there have to be certain moral absolutes that are beyond contention, and those moral absolutes have to be universally accepted.
Why have to be? Why do you say they have to be?
You can ground that, I suppose, in a sort of descriptive universe. The problem is that, to go back to your example, which again I think is a really interesting one, if a man comes to kill me, I think the real question of religion versus non-religion in the utility sphere here is it more likely that a man is going to come to kill you being a devotee of a religion that says that he must kill you?
Yes. Before you even finish this, the answer is yes. Just look at history. Look at the number of terrorist attacks carried out in the name of religion. Not even the one you're thinking of, but any religion.
Or is it more likely that a man is going to kill you out of self-interest because he is not a devotee of a God who says that killing is wrong?
Statistically, it's way more likely that the first option is going to happen.
So if you are faced with these two alternatives, to kind of remove your example one step, the question is why the man has come to kill you. I mean, that's your premise is the man has come to kill you because God told him to, and so he can't be dissuaded by force. Agreed. We see that full scale in the real world on a fairly regular basis. It is also true that over the course of human history, men have come to kill one another on the basis of self-interest in extraordinary amounts of the time. Tribal self-interest particularly, having no particular relationship with God, just the idea that I want to kill you over territory, I want to kill you over resources, I want to kill you because you're not a member of my immediate kin family, or because you killed a member of my kin family, and so in revenge I need to kill a member of your kin family.
And I don't think there's ever been a case where two people got into a deadly confrontation because they had differing concepts of atheism. I don't think that's happened. I think more people have died over Air Force Ones than that. Either stealing somebody's shoes or somebody's shoes get scuffed and they get into an altercation and somebody dies. It's actually happened. Well, it happened on the show Oz, but I assume that it's probably happened before. I know that there was a case where somebody like got killed because their shoes got stolen. Their Jordans. I know that that's happened because I've seen it on the news before. But I remember it was the actor from The Wire, one of the guys who is like in the project, like selling crack. One of those actors, I think Bodie is the character's name on the show Oz. He's like playing a 16-year-old and somebody scuffs his shoes, and I think like he like kills the guy and gets sent to Oz. So I think more people have died over sneakers than have died over conflicts about atheism. But tons of people have killed each other in the name of their God or in the name of religion. That's just so obvious.
To borrow from your language, the entire sort of evolution of religion on a utility basis would have been to create moral absolutes that are applicable more broadly than to you and your friends. Any morality that can be created on an individual level is inherently dangerous because you can immediately graft that morality onto your personal self-interest. The entire purpose of religion, whether you want to ground that in evolutionary brain functionings, or whether you want to ground that in revelation, the entire purpose of religion on a utility level is to remove morality from the purview of my special interest and to say, here are things that I cannot do.
That's impossible. You can't separate morality from people's self-interests. And that just goes to show that there aren't moral absolutes because society changes and morality along with society changes, which is why having a book that is unchanging because it's supposed to be inspired from God and have commandments in it, and those things don't change even though Christians pick and choose what they want from the Bible. And they say, oh, these statutes matter, these commandments matter, but these things in Leviticus, some of them matter and some of them don't matter. Like the part about shellfish doesn't matter and the part about mixed fabrics doesn't matter, but we're really serious about the part about homosexual sex. That definitely is unchanged from the time that it was written. The fact that society and societal morality changes shows that there is no such thing as moral absolutes, because the concept doesn't make any sense. And you can't separate that from people's self-interest, because morality is inherently based on the self and how you feel in a given situation. It's just a fact.
Even if they are in my interest, because there is a higher power that says I cannot do these things. I think.
Yeah, but secretly that higher power is just you. So it's still you making those decisions, Ben.
I think that a society that does not have these moral absolutes is in deep trouble. A society that refuses to say that there are certain absolutes that cannot be crossed under any circumstances that are universally applicable, it reduces things that we all take for granted, like.
But the society of the United States is 70% or more Christian. So there are moral absolutes, apparently, right? Except there are all these different sects of Christianity. And some of them say different things. Some of them say that something is a sin, and some of them say that that thing is not a sin. And so they don't agree on anything. And then on top of that, you have the individual interpretations of the Bible and what it says, because it's a book that was written in Aramaic or Greek, translated to different languages, and eventually translated to English, like not that long ago, because most people use the King James Bible. I would assume that's the most popular Bible in the United States. But so how can that be absolute? It's not. And even Christianity, they just stapled the New Testament onto Ben's favorite version of the Bible, which is the Torah or the Old Testament. So it's like, oh, this one wasn't good enough, so we added all this other stuff on top of it. And we're going to pick and choose what we keep out of the Old Testament, because some of that stuff is icky, like sacrificing animals and building a tabernacle.
Equal justice before the law, like the idea that the law is supposed to equally apply to everybody, whether they're a member of your family or whether they're not. And there are broad cultural differences in these questions. I mean, to pretend that all human societies have equality under law is obviously not true. It's not even remotely true, actually.
Yeah, especially LGBT people who you constantly like shit talk, Ben, on your show all the time, who you promote persecution against, you dick. Like, of course they don't have equal rights. Ben Shapiro is just wearing the kippah to cover the bald spot that shows how smooth his brain really is. See, you're going to be called anti-Semitic like I was. I got called anti-Semitic because I made fun of Ben Shapiro's hat.
There's a very good book called The Weirdest People in the World, all about the idea that we in the West have this sort of ethnocentric view of ourselves, where we think everybody thinks like people in the West. But the truth is that because we are Western educated, industrialized, rich and democratic, we have particular views of the world. Those views are drawn from a particularistic tradition. That particularistic tradition is biblical in nature. I mean, it is Judeo-Christian in nature, even if you're just describing European society or American society historically speaking.
I like the idea of saying that that the West is rich. I don't know if that's supposed to imply that everybody in the West is rich, but everybody in America is not rich. There's a lot of people that live below the poverty line. Ben is rich. I'm not rich. Maybe we should redistribute some of Ben's income to me and everybody in this live chat.
So the kind of removal of God from the equation, your suggestion is that God makes a person impervious to countervailing responses. And my answer is yes, God does make a person impervious to countervailing responses, including the evils of one's own heart, if you truly believe that God is standing above you, telling you not to do that thing. And again, social science tends to bear this out. People who believe that God is above them tend to give more charity, for example. People who tend to live inside religious communities, within the religious community. And I'm not going to pretend that I think all religions are equivalent in their truth propositions, because I don't. I mean, if I did, I wouldn't be wearing a yarmulke, right? So that's just what it is. Inside religious communities, a lot of social bonds and a lot of social frameworks are built on the basis of this shared belief system.
Okay, that's the first thing that Ben has said that I think is really true and that I agree with. That's absolutely true, and I think there is a value to religion in that statement, or that shows that there is some value to religion in the community building aspect of it. And I'm of the opinion, and this may be disappointing for some atheists to hear, but I think that religion is never going away. And I think that there are some people in our society that actually need religion. Like, there are the people in the West, like Ben said, who are educated, who are living relatively easygoing lives. You know, we live above the poverty line. We don't live in a third world scenario. And I think that there are people who are working class or who live in even more difficult lives who don't have some of the privileges and some of the luxuries that we have in Western society, who do need a religion because it's all they've known. And I don't want to rip that away from them. I would never want to take that away from somebody. If somebody is going to come away from religion to atheism, I would want them to come to that decision based on their own decision making. I wouldn't want to force anybody to make that decision. Like, I might plant a seed in their mind to make them think about it, but I would never want to take away something that brings somebody community or happiness or joy, even if that joy is based on a false premise. You know, I mean, they've done studies that show that people who pray or who sing in a choir or who have a religious experience, it lights up the same part of your brain that lights up when you're gambling or drinking or doing drugs. It provides that same level of satisfaction. And like Aaron Ross said, sometimes people give up one for the other. Like the stories of, oh, I used to be a crack whore, and then I found Jesus, and now I'm saved, and I go around planting trees and founding YMCAs, and I'm such a great person now. I'm always a little bit suspicious of those stories personally, but yeah.
In other words, diversity itself, self-interest, cannot always check self-interest, and it tends to tear apart societies and communities unless there is an orienting goal. That orienting goal traditionally has been performed by church. It's been traditionally performed by the idea that you are serving God together. And because of that, people build these social bonds, including the institutions of police, for example, to prevent people from killing each other, because we now all agree.
Unless the police are the ones doing the killing, right? Oops.
That killing is wrong, and so we ought to have a third party that we can actually give the power to stop that killing. So again, I think that the question of utility here is one of whether you think that the chief danger is that people are going to believe in a God who tells them to kill in God's name, or whether you
isn't God just the ultimate cop? Isn't he though? God is the ultimate cop, and religious people are the ultimate bootlickers. That's just what I think.
I think that the chief danger is in man's own heart, and that man is going to be driven by his own self-interest to commit murder and then call it something else.
I think it's all very well and good when this religious tradition is protecting what you think is good. But as we know, it can do the exact opposite, and it can do so with the same force.
Sure.
And I suppose the question we have to ask is whether this is a worthwhile trade-off. That is to say, that there may be some social utility in putting our fundamental ethical assumptions outside of the realm of debate. But when those ethical statements begin to inspire what we would probably consider to be less than socially cohesive behavior, there is nothing you can do, nothing to talk people out of them, precisely because that's where they've placed them. And that seems dangerous to me. And it seems, for example, a lot of people talk about how religion can make people happier, it can make people more socially cohesive, it can promote people to start families and have children. This is true of most religions. This is also true of Islam, which I'm not sure you would want to say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm not sure you'd want to say is a force for good in the world. I don't think, in other words, that it's always a worthwhile trade-off. Now,
I agree with you, by the way.
Just because you mentioned how the sort of culture of Europe and its success and America is indebted to Christianity. I mean, this is of course true in a sense, but there's been a recent revival, it seems. I don't really know quite how it's happened. I think it's got a lot to do with Tom Holland, maybe. That's the historian, not the superhero.
Not Spider-Man.
This idea that
Although
actually...
he's good too. He's a good
Actually,
guy.
the great... I wonder what he would have to say on all of this. The Western civilization sort of depend and should be in gratitude to a religious tradition because it provided this kind of ethical framework in which this could have arisen. We hear about the scientific enlightenment. We hear about the grounding of ethics and God, the creation of natural rights, as if these things weren't established in resistance all the way along to the religious tradition. A society that today, I'll expand on this if you like, a society today that decides that religion throughout its history has been wrong about the position of women in society, wrong about the mortal fate of practicing homosexuals, wrong about the position of the earth in relation to the sun, wrong about the age of both of those celestial bodies, wrong about the common evolutionary ancestry of every animal, including the human animal, on planet Earth, wrong about the ownership of other human beings as private property, now has to contend with a religious tradition that doesn't come to us with contrition and apology and say, well, maybe we were wrong about these things. But no, these are all our things after all. We're going to claim these things. That is, I know that St. Paul says, I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over a man. Rather, she should remain silent. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And that man is the glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. But don't you know that the social justice movement is essentially Judeo-Christian in origin? I know that the Old Testament not only explicitly condones the ownership of other human beings as private property, but gives detailed instructions about exactly how to buy and indeed take them, sometimes including as sexual property. But don't you know that the abolitionist movement was essentially Judeo-Christian in origin? Yes, I know that Galileo was shown the instruments of torture by the Inquisition for having the temerity to suggest that the Earth might orbit the sun rather than the other way around. But
Dang, he's spitting fire. See, this is so good, but I almost wish, I don't know how to phrase this. I almost wish that he would just stop at one good point and then Ben would have to respond to that rather than firing off like several good points. But let me read this comment. I've been trying to read more comments because I know some people listen to these streams when they're working or whatever and can't see the video. So from Transitional Old Lady, it says, AJ, you are kinder to religion than I am. I think that religion and the legalism it promotes is the refuge of the simple-minded. That might be, I think you're casting kind of a wide net there. But I respect your opinion. You know what I mean? We respect all comers on this channel. I've been trying to be kinder lately in my online content and to people in general, trying to put out more positive energy. This has to move on, or I know, I understand, like, this is getting pretty tedious because I still feel like we barely scratched the surface of the actual freaking question of the debate. And I feel like this moderator is useless. You just can't trust a bald man. Like Mark Reed, can't trust him. Guys, we might get Grayson to join the stream. Maybe, probably not though. It's pretty late, but I sent him the link. We'll see.
don't you know that the scientific revolution, which he authored, was essentially Judeo-Christian in origin? I'd find it funny if it wasn't so offensive to the people who established these very developments against the very religious traditions that now want to claim them as their own.
Okay, so I would buy that, except for the fact that many of the people that you mentioned in these contexts explicitly counted themselves as religious believers and were speaking in the name of the religion while they were doing it. So to take the abolitionist movement as an example, I mean, William Wilberforce, obviously a tremendously religious person and a big believer in the New Testament. Isaac Newton, obviously deeply ensconced in the New Testament, right? Yeah, certainly important to the scientific revolution. The point about religion, and this is why when I wrote my book, I have to name the title now and plug myself because that's the way
you
that
got
works.
to wave
the right
around.
Side of, the right side of history. But the reason that I talked about how reason and moral purpose made the West is because I think that one of the fundamental precepts of at least Judeo-Christian religion is that when God gives a text or a set of ideas to human beings, he expects us to use our reason to apply to those texts. And so the sort of evolution of interpretation is part of the religious tradition. I mean, that's always been the case in my religion anyway. So I can only, I always hesitate to speak on behalf of other people's religions because I don't know them nearly as well as I know my own. Mm-hmm. So when I talk about sort of the application of reason to tradition in the religious tradition, obviously we have books and books and books of texts discussing and debating these very ideas. And the idea of religious debate has always been central to the idea of Judeo-Christian religion, and when it hasn't been, it's been seen as repressive and has spawned then other Christian movements that then argue with the original movement and end up generating in almost Hegelian fashion some new form of interpretation. The point that I'm making is that outside that framework, it doesn't exist, meaning that if the argument is over interpretation of particular biblical verses in a context in which there is a God who puts certain moral precepts beyond human judgment, those arguments you can have without threatening the entire social structure. What is very difficult is to have a social structure at all in the absence of fundamental moral precepts that are presupposed by everyone. And I think one of the reasons that you're seeing a sort of revival of this idea that religion is very important to the West is because one of the things that we have seen is that as religion has become less important to the West, we've seen declining birth rates en masse. We've seen rises in suicidal ideation. We've seen, especially over the last 10 years, tremendous individual atomization, certainly an extraordinary amount of less social connection. Right? All of these things are things that, frankly, used to be provided by church and these social institutions that, again, were oriented toward a single purpose. So when you talk about the idea that, I'm going to put aside the free will discussion because I think, again, it's easy to get caught up in the reversion to the argument that I was making before when you were saying that, can you argue the man out of stabbing you? To use your framework, I mean, you can't argue him out of doing anything. I mean, you're going to say words, the words are going to have an impact, but you can't argue him out of doing anything. But not to get back into a topic that we've handled, free will is done.
I'm not going to answer that, although hopefully people will know from what I said before that I think it's still sensible to say you can argue somebody out of something. The first half of what you say there is in so many words, I think, what I was saying before, which is that, yes, this goes both ways.
I mean, assuming this person is insane and not just threatening you because they want your money, because they're greedy and like a criminal, it is potentially possible to use illogic on a crazy person. Like if you guys ever saw that episode of Breaking Bad where Jesse gets the tweaker meth head guy to start digging a hole because people who are on a stimulant enjoy doing repetitive activities, and he uses that to his advantage. I mean, it's possible. You could appeal to the guy's like insane brain and be like, look, I know about the aliens, okay? I know they're influencing you to do this, but you don't have to stab me because I'm on your side. I'm also crazy.
That is, thanks be to God when he is able to provide us with the grounding for resisting oppression and throwing off tyranny.
Yeah.
But what about when the same God is used to justify the exact opposite?
Right, but you're going to.
All I'm saying is that this goes both ways. We'll never know.
But you're going to have to weigh in one side or the other.
We'll
meaning
also,
that in terms of utility, right? You're building a society. Let's say that I won't say you're God. Let's say that you are master of a society and you get to build that society. One of the things that presumably you are going to do is you're going to build in certain things that are untouchable, right? There's going to be certain moral precepts that you're going to build in that are untouchable. And how are you going to justify those things to people such that they are going to believe you? You're going to either have to use compulsion or you're going to have to use some sort of other argument that is so strong that they are going to overweigh their self. I mean, there's a reason why Voltaire suggested he didn't believe in God, but he hoped that his maid did, so she wouldn't steal the silverware.
Yeah, that's an interesting indictment on the position that theists.
Hey, we got a Voltaire quote by Ben.
Don't say that atheists can't be moral, right? When people have this argument about morality,
atheists can certainly be moral.
Well, oftentimes people have this misunderstanding of the argument. Christopher Hitchens did it best in saying, we don't need divine permission to be good and all of this. Fine, but as you say, you don't need to believe in God to be good, but you need to believe in God to ground that goodness. But then when you sort of casually throw in this statement by Voltaire, I don't believe in God, but I hope that my maid does. That implies that actually maybe you do think that without the belief in God, somebody isn't going to.
No, I think that Voltaire thought that he was good, meaning that Voltaire was an atheist and thought that he was good. But his point was sort of back to the Straussian Platonic point.
His point was that he hoped his maid believed in God because without that belief, she wouldn't be able to act morally.
Right. So because again, when we're arguing on the basis of broad societal utility, one of the things. So I happen to be in the happy position of being able to argue that what I think is socially useful also happens to be true. Mm-hmm. The question I'm asking you, and I think that's what a lot of this conversation is whether you think that what is socially useful is actually false or an evolutionary illusion. And I think that's kind of the position that you're taking, unless you want to argue that generally speaking, religion is either not evolutionarily adaptive, which would be a hard position to actually take.
Well, I think it must be, otherwise it wouldn't exist.
Or you would have to argue that it's, even if it's adaptive, it's of no general benefit to humankind or is an illusion, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's the position that you're taking. So,
okay, so Shockman, I agree with you. So, I mean, this debate is supposed to be about religion's impact on society, right? Is religion good or bad for society? And instead, it's veering off into objective morality, free will, like human dignity. It's just getting bogged down into philosophical tangents that really aren't answering the main topic, which is not that hard to answer. So I think that I am just going to give my opinion, and then we'll either wrap the stream up or I'll play a little bit more of the debate and see if it gets any better. So I would say, is religion a net positive? Is it? Let's see. What is the topic exactly of the debate? Because I want to get this right. Is religion good for society? Why is the title of the video slightly different? Okay, is religion good or bad for society? So I think there are a bunch of like prerequisites for asking that question. So you'd have to define good or bad. Going with my definitions of good or bad, I think you would absolutely say it's bad, because clearly religious wars have caused untold amounts of unnecessary suffering to innocent people, right? Because who are the main victims of war? It's women, it's the elderly, it's children, it's non-military age combatants, non-male, non-military age combatants, who generally are the primary victims of war. Just look at Hiroshima. I mean, they targeted civilian centers intentionally with those bombs. And there's a great video by the channel Sean that shows that it was not absolutely necessary to do that. Now, that's not based on religion, but there have been plenty of wars that I think if the people in charge of those wars had the opportunity to drop a nuke on their enemies, they probably would have. So I think if you look at the positive things that religion has done for society, the community building, the charity aspect of it, the moral impetus for people to not break the 10 Commandments, even though the 10 Commandments are flawed and don't say anything about SA. And they're written in a language that is not, the 10 Commandments should really be like a legal document that's like way longer. It has like specific cases. Like having one sentence for each commandment is way too like simplistic and vague. But that's how God wrote it, right? God wrote it. God inspired it to be written. Isn't it funny that the only documents that God ever authored with his own hand were like broken and shattered? Like Moses had to read the 10 Commandments and then they were written down. But according to Kent Hovind, God wrote it on a rock with his finger. So my answer to this debate is no. Yeah, different sets. We're just supposed to believe Moses, right? I don't trust that guy. I think if you look at all of the religious wars, just look at today, look at Palestine, look at what Israel has done with the benefit of US aid, by the way, our financial support, military supports, weapons, military technology, and pretty much the support of our president. I don't want to use the G word, but they did a big G word on the Palestinians. Is that controversial to say? Israel did a G word on the Palestinians? I mean, by definition, they did. And that's based on religion. Look at all the success that Kent Hovind has had. Look at all the damage that young earth creationism has done to our education system, directly influenced by religion. People like that get power because they're seen as a religious authority. Based on what? Based on their knowledge of the Bible. Thinking that absolute morality is a thing. How much damage has that done to like the LGBT community, saying that it's because it's been encoded in our laws? Just recently, think about how crazy it is that just recently, the most supposedly advanced country in the world, the United States, just recently legalized gay marriage, and they want to repeal it. There's people that don't support gay marriage still. Like, not to be crude, but like, fuck off. Like, leave people alone. Obviously, gay and lesbian couples should get the same legal rights that heterosexual married couples do. You know? I mean, I'm pretty sure before gay marriage was legalized, if somebody was in the hospital, their partner would be unable to go into the room to see them because they're not a direct family member and they're not married because they can't get married. How fucked up is that? So, like, that's just cruelty. That's empowered by the supposed moral absolutes that supposedly don't change, but that do change. So I think it's obvious, and I'm disappointed that Alex is being as cordial as he is here. All right, let's kick back over to the video.
One of the things that I'm enjoying about the conversation is that I don't think either of us are going to argue each other in anything, but it is clarifying what exactly the lines of the division are.
Yes, to backtrack a moment, because you said more than one thing in what I just responded to. You also mentioned, you talked about Isaac Newton being a Christian. So, I mean, people were astonished discovering his private notes to find that he spent more time talking about theology than he did science. This is certainly the case, but I do think it's worth pointing out when people like to notice that the originators of the scientific revolution in particular were believers in God. There are a few things to say on that. First, we don't know what Galileo thought in his heart of hearts. And part of the reason for that is because despite tripping over himself to say, now look, I don't think Scripture is wrong. Now look, I believe in God and I am a Christian and I believe in Scripture, but maybe the earth orbits the sun. His life falls apart. So suppose he did secretly have doubts about the existence of God. Do you think we'd ever have even found out about it?
And that's an unfalsifiable argument.
I think not a chance. In other words,
but the lack of falsifiability makes it difficult for me making a counter argument.
In other words, let's not be so
maybe
confident.
Maybe he did have a secret diary, but I have no proof that he had a secret diary.
What I'm saying is, let's not be so confident.
Hey, Ben, stop interrupting the other guy, please.
About this. The second thing to say is that these men, if that's what they were remembered for, that is their theology, then they wouldn't be remembered. Thirdly, is that just on the minor point that people often like to point out that, well, the originators of the scientific revolution were religious, and so science can't conflict with religion. I'm not going to make the claim that science does conflict with religion in principle, but supposing that it did, this would not serve as a rebuttal, because if it were the case that the scientific revolution and the scientific method undermines religion, then of course the people who invented the scientific method would themselves have been religious, because
science has conflicted with religion in the past, though. You can't deny that, because he's bringing up Galileo.
They hadn't invented the mechanism by which it came to be undermined yet.
Yeah, but then afterward, they presumably would be irreligious or a-religious, which is what happened to Darwin, for example.
It doesn't happen that quickly, right? It really doesn't happen.
On an individual level, it certainly
if we're talking about the development of the scientific method, we're not talking about the kind of thing that just happens in a lifetime. I mean, to attribute it to Galileo and Newton as we happily do is far too simplistic. This is something that happens over at least decades.
Right, but you're making both an individual argument and a broader historical argument.
Taking the example of Darwin losing some of his faith, which I don't think he ever completely lost all of it, and applying that to everyone who helped found the natural sciences is a disingenuous argument. And the reason that Darwin lost some of his faith was because he discovered the amount of cruelty in nature. I think a specific example is, I don't know the specific name, but I think it's like the jade wasp that lays its eggs in insects like cockroaches. And fuck them, by the way. I have a horrible phobia of those things, like horrible. It lays its eggs inside the living host, and then its babies hatch from the eggs, and then burrow their way out of the still living organism for food, killing it. Or parasitic wasps that will infect a snail and cause its antennae to pulsate and cause it to go out to want to go out in the sun, where birds can see it more easily and mistake it for a big juicy worm to pass itself onto that host, which is kind of ingenious in a way. But the cruelty of it. Or parasites that lodge themselves in the eyes of other organisms. So that was one reason why. Oh, and also because like 8 of his children died. So
pick one.
And so what I'm saying is that the individual beliefs of the founders of that revolution, I don't think that revolution would have gotten off the ground enough from just their contributions within their lifetime to shake decades of prior faith. However, when you get to someone like a Darwin, then we start to see agnosticism. Then we start to see people having their doubt. And then when you get into the modern era, atheism abounds. And so, in other words, if it were the case that this thesis, which, like I say, is not something that I'm defending here, I'm just sort of rebutting the rebuttal to it. That is, if it were the case that the scientific method were this king of undermining religion, then I think we would expect the fact that those who invented it to have been religious. It would be like saying, isn't it amazing that the person who invented the motor car didn't own a motor car before that?
Well, no, because, again, you've now also made the case that perhaps they had secret diaries, or in their heart of hearts they weren't actually religious or convinced away from that. So, again, that's why I'm saying I feel like you're making a broader historical argument that works, and I think you're making an individual argument that doesn't quite.
I'm not saying that is the case. I'm saying that we would never know why is that? Why will we never know what Galileo really thought about religion?
Well, I'm going to just accuse you of assuming facts, not in evidence. I mean, like,
let's move it away from
because
Galileo.
again, I don't want to get into the mind of Galileo, nor do I care very much. But the reality is that many of the people who were the progenitors of the scientific revolution and participants in the scientific revolution specifically were searching for something higher because they thought that was their godly duty to do so. I mean, this has been true since the time of Roger Bacon. I mean, the idea that you have people who are specifically seeking out the nature of the universe, because there's an understandable, again, another religious precept, there's an understandable universe that God has created, and your mind is a reflection of certain truths that are in that universe. These are all non-materialist atheistic concepts. That was the basis for virtually all of science, including the origins of the scientific revolution. Now, you can make the argument very easily. I mean, I make it all the time because I have to metaphoricalize the beginning of Genesis, for example, that the words of Genesis don't jibe with the words of science when it comes to the age of the universe, for example.
Hell no, they don't. They absolutely don't, especially if you want to take them literally. If you want to say that they're metaphorical, then I have less of an issue with that. But unfortunately, there's a scary number of people that think that Noah's Ark is a true story. Like, I think I've told this story before, but the time when the moment I sort of first became an atheist was when I was in Sunday school and they first told us about Noah's Ark. And I was like, there's no way they could fit all those animals on one boat. And from that moment, I just never believed any of it. I just couldn't. I was just unconvinced from that point on, because I found that to be so ridiculous and incongruous with reality, because it was presented as something that actually happened. But there are some people that swallow it. And I'm not saying it's a matter of intelligence. Sometimes it can be. But it was just, that was just my personal experience.
And obviously that's true, which is why both Maimonides and Aquinas are talking about in the Middle Ages, the idea that if science comes into conflict with religion, you're either getting one of them wrong or you're getting both of them wrong.
Yeah, the Middle Ages, that time when people who didn't believe religion to be true or didn't believe the right religion got tortured to death. That's a good thing to cite.
And so the constant sort of reinterpretation of religion in light of the facts that are established by the scientific method, I don't think that that's a rebuttal of religion. And so and more than that, I think that the peculiar idea that religion itself must fundamentally be undermined by scientific discovery, I don't see quite why.
Well, I would agree with that. I'm just saying that the rebuttal that's presented to that opinion fairly commonly, I don't think works for the reasons that I've said.
There's a moth called the Luna moth that is born or does its metamorphosis, and the adult form of it has no mouth and it starves to death. Is that designed? Is that a design? I mean, I did a whole video about this, about are these animals designed like the boar that has teeth or tusks that will grow through its brain, killing it slowly if it doesn't wear them down. And the other example being the three-toed sloth that moves so slowly that it grows moss and will sometimes die because it leaves its tree to take a dump, and it'll get killed by a predator when it could just crap from the tree. There's so many examples.
Okay, well, let's have give you both a little breather.
I love it that this person doesn't even know what the topic of the debate is. The topic of the debate is supposed to be, is religion good or bad for a society? It's such a simple question, too.
Because we're going to go to another break very shortly. We fitted in so much, and I had all these questions, and I haven't asked any of them, and I'm worried now that I'm going to be left unemployed.
You probably should be, because you're shit as a moderator. Sorry. I'm sorry to be mean, but you suck at your job.
Before we move on, I don't know if I can have one final word on this Galileo point, because I know it seems quite strange that I'm sort of hypothesizing in this way, but you said that when religion and science come into conflict, either one is wrong or both is wrong. Galileo was wrong about one of these things potentially. What happens if I mean, you can? It's great talking about the utility of his religious belief in inspiring his scientific endeavor, but what happens when the immediate fruit of that is him discovering something which should have been a celebrated idea and instead was suppressed, and he ends up under house arrest?
Yeah, he ended up under house arrest because his scientific discoveries disagreed with the biblical tradition that said that the Earth was at the center of the solar system. And my allergies are driving me crazy. I have to go get a tissue. I'll be back.
In Tuscany for the rest of his life. Why? Specifically because the religious authorities, in their sentencing of Galileo, did not just say that he failed to prove it, did not just say that he was, being a bit of an a-hole in his approach to things, but said specifically because it is false, absurd, and contrary to Scripture. That is why that scientific position was suppressed on specifically religious motivations.
And far be it for me to defend the Catholic Church and its crackdown on Galileo.
Okay.
You've come to the wrong place for that.
Okay, it's time. It's time for another break here. You are watching and listening to the big conversation from Premier Unbelievable. I am almost anonymous here, Andy Kind, but my day will come, and I've been joined by Ben Shapiro and Alex O'Connor. We'll be talking about religion and society. Is religion good for society? So much more still to talk about. We'll see what we can fit in. We will fit in as much as we can, but we'll be back after this short break. Enjoying the conversation? Unbelievable. Today we are discussing religion and is it good or bad for society, and we're having a lot of fun with it, I think. I mean, I know you're sort of in disagreement on things, but I think we're just having fun with it today, aren't we?
As ever.
To be honest, I'm kind of just annoyed, but it's about to get good because Alex is going to bring up biblical slavery.
Well, I've been joined by Ben Shapiro and Alex O'Connor. And as I say, we're talking about religion and its role in society. One observation I've got from watching you guys talk, I wonder whether religion is being used as a bit of a catch-all term. There is no summer festival where Ben and I would meet up because we're religious and have a beer together. Plenty of Buddhist people don't even believe in God. So we probably don't have the time to unpack it now, but religion is maybe not a helpful catch-all term at all points. I wonder whether, when we're saying religion in this context, we mean the Judeo-Christian worldview. But it's interesting, I, as a Christian, there's lots of things I agree with Ben on, some things I disagree on. Lots of things, as an Englishman, that I agree with Alex on, and other things that I wouldn't.
Spelling.
So yes, spelling, absolutely. It's aluminium. Anyway, I just think that's interesting.
Actually, it's a different pronunciation, but the spelling would be the same either way. Thank you.
not trying to start this theist gang and gang up on you, Alex at all. But yeah, what do you think quickly about that? When we're talking about religion, do we need to be more semantically sort of accurate?
Rigorous, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, again, I'm not here to defend every form of religion under the sun. They're
Yeah, no crap, Ben. You're going to defend the one specific religion that you happen to believe in. That's what every religious person does. I'm going to read this comment, though, from Transitional Old Lady. It says, I'm a middle school teacher, and religion has had no positive impact on any of my students, especially those who fall out of the white hetero stereotype so beloved by the right. Well, that's unfortunate. I think that's a microcosm of society at large, though, isn't it? I mean, the people who have the majority demographic details are going to be in power, and it's going to be the same people who have tended to be in power all throughout human history. And they're going to treat people who are different to them, even if it's subconsciously, they're going to treat those people lesser than they probably should, subconsciously or consciously, unfortunately.
various forms of religion, ranging from things that people in Judeo-Christian tradition would consider pagan, to Judeo-Christian monotheism, to the distinctions in Judaism and Christianity, which are substantial, obviously. And so, I do believe that there are right forms of religion, or righter forms of religion than others. If I didn't, then I wouldn't be a particularist in my religious practice or my religious belief. And so I do think that you're right to sort of boil down the question so that people don't end up defending things or being forced to defend things that they wouldn't defend. I mean, you mentioned before Islam. I'll say more radical forms of Islam, because again, I'm one thing that I tend not to.
The radical, I love how the Orthodox Jew is complaining about radical Islam. Like, are we going to say that devout religion is inherently bad, or just the ones that I don't like because the people look and act different to me and they're an easy target? How bad? You foot.
Do as a religious believer is simply take people's texts at sort of face value, because the reality is that very few people in religious circles take their text at like I can just pick up a Bible, read it, and now I know everything that's going on in the Bible value. That really is not how the practice of religion works. I tend to actually judge faith by faith practice more so than I do by trying to read somebody else's book and then figure out exactly what they're saying, because I've seen people do that enough to my religious practice to sort of object to it. But yeah, of course, I think that you would have to talk, if you're going to talk about the value of religion, you should be more specific. I will say that the value of religion more generally, if you were going to talk about it in just general terms, meaning belief in supernatural things that can't be explained by a materialist universe, the social cohesion point would be the best case in favor of religion, is that virtually.
So there's social cohesion because a bunch of people believe in something that isn't actually true. It kind of sounds like that's what he's saying.
Every study ever done has shown that social cohesion relies on a common orientation among people in order to build commonality between people. They're really only.
But there's no study that says that belief has to be something that is made the F up. I mean, it's a byproduct. It's a byproduct. And you know what else has social cohesion? A cult. Cults have social cohesion. They have the most intense form of it because they have an in-group, out-group dynamic. So maybe social cohesion isn't always good, not when it's taken to an extreme, and any outsiders are viewed as villains to be violently fought off. And family members of people who are in that cult are meant to be shunned. I mean, what more? What's a better example of social cohesion than a religious cult? I ask of you, Ben.
A few structures in human history that do that. One is a kinship structure. The problem with kinship and tribal structures is that they pretty quickly devolve into tribal warfare upon other members of different tribes. One of the things that religion has done is an attempt to universalize that beyond the immediate sort of tribal self-interest that we discussed a little bit ago. And again, pretty much universally, social science suggests that many of the institutions that we hold dear, that shape us, that provide us social support, that provide us friendship structures, marriages, that a huge amount of this used to happen anyway inside of these traditional religious structures, and there really has been nothing to replace it. And so the sort of breakdown of those structures, you could make the case, I suppose, for the breakdown of those structures, but there's been pretty much no replacement for those structures in secular society, and it's creating some pretty significant strains on societal bonding.
Example. Give an example. You don't just say it, Ben. I disagree vehemently.
Great.
I suppose I do have two things to
I'm
say.
going to ask you, I want you to say both of those things, but I want to ask you, Alex, can secular societies potentially achieve the same level of social cohesion as religious ones?
Potentially, maybe. I don't know. That seems to be an empirical question, insofar as we can have empirical data on social cohesion as a subject. I wanted to, I suppose, in response to that question, mention the history of the United States as
Here it comes.
a constitutionally secular nation. Presumably the discussion there devolves into whether America can be described as a Christian nation or not. But based on what you just said a moment ago, before we maybe get into that, you said, of course, we need more specificity is hardly ever worse than less, and that you're not trying to defend all religious traditions. And then you say, but look, this idea of there being a God and there being an unalterable authority and a moral author of the universe is itself valuable, and without it, there are all kinds of societal discohesion comes about. In that case, for example, I wonder, and I hope it's not a crude question, and it's one sort of stemming from genuine interest. Would you rather your child comes to you and says, I think I'm going to convert to Islam, or said, I don't think I believe in God anymore?
Great question. Great freaking question.
As a Jew, I'm fairly indifferent on the question.
Oh, come on. Oh, come on, dude. Cop out. Boo. Boo.
Meaning that my priority is for my child to remain a Jew, and which direction they go from there is of much
Well, they can't exactly remain a Jew either way, can they, Ben? Boo.
less interest to me than staying inside the religious tradition that I believe is correct.
Okay, maybe I should rephrase to say, suppose that
You shouldn't have to rephrase the question. I think the question was completely clear. And that was what we call a dodge.
half of the US population immediately, right now, and half of, let's say half of the Christian population. So it's not to do with
Right.
Judaism, and it's not to do with your own family. Half of the Christian population in the United States are immediately going to convert today to atheism if you press this button, or to Islam if you press this button. Which one would you press?
So I'm going to ask for more specificity.
Sure.
And
Boo. I don't think that Alex should have backed off of his first question. And I think this is Ben dodging again.
in line with the conversation. So which form of Islam are we talking about, and which form of atheism are we talking
Who cares? What do you mean form of atheism? Boo.
about? Because they come in various strains. But meaning, like, if we're just starting from the premise of no God or Islamic God, that actually is not enough information.
Sunni or Shiite, it doesn't matter. Just pick one. Shiite Islam, and what forms of atheism is he even talking about? I'd love for him to list them. Boo.
As I say, I'm not judging people
Yes.
based on their faith propositions nearly as much as I am based on their behavior, which I think they base on faith propositions.
Well,
So
let's say this is the only thing that changes. You press this button, half the Christian population become convinced that there is no real God of the universe. Everything else is random. Whatever you might, because what we're discussing here is essentially what are the implications of such a worldview?
Right.
What are the implications of atheism, which is just the disbelief in God, or the belief that
do
there is
people have
not one.
memories? Sorry, in this hypothetical, do people have memories or they don't have memories? Because this makes a difference.
They
Of course they have memories. Why would they not have memories? The button isn't a neuralizer from Men in Black. Boo, sir.
have memories.
Okay, fine. So then probably in the West, atheism, as opposed to a more radical form of Islam. That's why I was asking for specificity,
Well,
because they're more
the
moderate
button on the
forms.
right-hand side was going to be that they just become convinced that Muhammad is the final prophet of God.
Right.
That's it.
And again, I was going to ask for more specificity on that, because I know many moderate Muslims who are not radical in the implication of their faith, as opposed to some who very much are quite radical in the implications of their faith. So
Yeah, that's a tiny minority. It's a minority. And radical Islamists have committed bold acts of terrorism since the 1980s and probably before that. That's irrelevant to the question, though, because the demographic makeup would be the same as it is now. You would just apply those percentages to the groups that you're talking about in the hypothetical. So this is frustrating.
But let's, if you don't mind, I'm going to set up your hypothetical in a way that I think.
I am an Orthodox atheist, but my partner is born again atheist. We're in no conflict due to that. What does that mean? I can't tell if you're joking or not.
Is more clarifying for me anyway, and that is button on the right is radical Islam, like Taliban style Islam.
Okay.
And button on the left is don't believe in God.
Well, I mean, you can do that.
No, the reason I'm doing that is because that elucidates a difference that I think is being obscured by the simple sort of belief in God, not belief in God question, meaning that the cultural heritage of that's why I asked if people have memories or people don't have memories. If people have memories, then that looks very much like secular Europe right now, which does have
the cultural heritage.
in the blood.
Oh my God! What? Where did that come from? What? Ben, jeez.
Stream a lot of Judeo-Christian values in a way that
Yes.
would not be true if you were without memory, right? Would I rather that a child found in a forest be raised in a moderate Muslim household or be raised in a secular communist household?
Or a secular atheist household, if I may say.
Oh, what's the difference? Huh?
Again, from which tradition? Are we talking in the USSR or are we talking in Britain? Like, what are we talking
We're talking
about
about
here?
Britain.
Okay, so we're talking.
Well, we were talking about the US, but let's say Britain.
Why is he talking about communism? This is like Kent Hovind levels of argumentation. Oh, well, in communist Russia, atheist debates you.
In Britain, depends on the strain of Islam. If we're talking about like a liberal form of Islam, which do exist, then probably a liberal form of Islam. If we're talking about a fundamentalist form of Islam, then probably a secular strain of Britain.
Fine. The second point was to say, I mean, you mentioned not wanting to just to take scripture at face value, and I understand that the difficulty of taking scripture essentially out of context and trying to take a literal approach where a literal approach isn't supposed to be taken. I mean, people forget that the Bible is a collection of books rather than a book with lots of different
with an oral
genres
tradition and all the
rest. I saw a video once of.
That's why the word Bible means the library. If you didn't know that, fun fact
of somebody trying to use the Bible to disprove the divinity of Jesus by quoting the book of Job, saying, "God is not a man that I might question him." God is not a man, you see, and I thought not only is this in the mouth of Job, but also, you know, that's the kind of thing that we want to avoid. But it does seem to me that there are some things within religious scripture that do need to be taken seriously and do need to be taken essentially at face value. That is some of the very specific legalistic commandments of the Old Testament, for example, or of the Hebrew Bible, I should say. These are not, when people list these and say that these are potentially morally problematic and may have done something towards hindering, for example, like I mentioned earlier, the abolition of slavery in the United States. Of course, there was a great deal of religious influence on both sides, as which is something that I've already mentioned. But don't you think that this problem could have been solved a lot more easily if there had been a stronger religious tradition of opposition to the ownership of other human beings? Why can't that have been the case?
Okay,
because Scripture quite explicitly condones it.
Right,
and in fact gives you the details of how to do
yes,
it.
so
did Ben just concede that the Bible promotes slavery? I feel like maybe he did, or he did accidentally.
Something that couldn't have been done, in other words, because
you've
taken
now I
this,
get to tell me to law. So
this moral principle that's placed outside of meaningful debate.
Right.
Before we move on, can I ask, where are we getting these buttons from? Are they from Amazon? You know, you press one and everyone's an atheist.
There's this wonderful thing
Are these available on the market?
You know, there is such a thing as interrupting the flow of a debate and derailing it. And this is fucking shitty moderation. I just have to say it. Like, just, I feel like this mod is letting Ben off the hook a bunch by like not saying, Ben, stop interrupting, and not saying, Ben, you need to answer this question. And not taking this debate seriously. I feel like Alex is the only one taking this debate seriously.
That I think you both need to use in this conversation, which is imagination.
Oh, right.
So let's. As far as why didn't the Bible prescribe the perfect world as I would see it, or as you might see it?
No. Why didn't a perfect God prescribe a Bible that said, don't own people and don't grape women? Or don't grape anybody. There's nothing in the Ten Commandments about SA. There could have been.
And the answer is because two reasons. One, as stated right up top, I'm not God. I assume he has different logic than I do. Mm-hmm. Two, the Bible is in an inherently problematic position in the sense that, on the one hand, it's trying to divulge important truths for all time. At the same time, it's talking to a people of a particular time.
Yes.
And this
Exactly. And society changes. So how can you have one book that is supposedly going to be unchanged when languages change, when the recording media that the earliest Bible scrolls were recorded on is semi-permanent and not meant to last hundreds of years or millennia? When morality in society changes, when all these things change, how can you have one book dictated by God that has law commandments for one specific society in a geographical area that is like a percentage of the entire earth? Could it be that maybe when it was written that they had no idea how huge the earth actually was? Or they didn't even know about the Earth's position in the solar system or the universe proper, because they had a archaic knowledge of cosmology and science? Yes, those things are all true. It's not because of, oh, God did it this certain way that I can't understand, because even with my big Shapiro brain, I can't understand God. It's very convenient.
This is a well-worn tradition inside Judaism. So to take the slavery example, there is no mandate to hold slaves in the Bible. Right? There are lots of mandates in the Bible, many, many mandates. There's 613 of them according to my religion, right? That's why I do all these weird things that I do. But one of those mandates is not to hold slaves. Right? And so the idea of there was a...
Wrong. The Bible doesn't outright forbid slavery. It has rules on how to own, treat, and punish the slaves that you do own. In Exodus 21, it says, if you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years, but in the 7th year he shall go free. Now that's indentured servitude, and there's a whole loophole with that, where after the 7th year, if your slave declares that he loves his master, you can pierce his ear with an awl, and then you own him for life, basically. But in all of those scenarios, the indentured servant in that time would have had a wife chosen for him by his master and would have had children with that woman who, if he leaves, are going to stay behind. And so if he wants to stay with his family and not be cast out destitute and poor with no housing and no work, no way of working, and to basically be an outcast in society, he's going to say, yeah, I love my master, and I'm going to stay working here because it's all I've known for the past almost decade, and I want to stay with my family and raise my children. So that's indentured servitude. But it specifically says in the Bible that you're supposed to get your slaves from outside of Israel, because the commandments and the laws in the Old Testament were specifically for that community. It was a guide on how to run basically a patriarchal, fundamentalist Judaic Hebrew society. So just like one of them said, it was for a certain community at a certain time. And so these dictates and laws obviously can't apply to our modern day in the same way or with the same significance, even if they're moral absolutes. I do agree that Ben is getting outmatched by Alex. I feel like Alex is hiding his power level out of politeness, and I wish she wouldn't, to be honest.
Society that existed at the time of the Bible, in which slaveholding was not only ubiquitous, it was universal, and which was...
Well, God wouldn't want to go against the society at the time, right? He wouldn't want to buck societal trends. Give me a break.
It's true for
I hate that argument.
Virtually all of human history.
That's right.
And could be justified not just in terms of religious scripture, but in terms of Aristotelian thought, right? I mean, the great philosophers we like to cite sometimes in the secular tradition are big fans of slavery. And that's true virtually up until the 18th century.
Yes.
So the idea would be, is this verse attempting to woo people away from a tradition of slavery or to humanize the slaves? Or is it attempting to...
Yeah, because we need to humanize slaves. They're already human. What do you mean humanize? What? I feel like that was a weirdly, like, kind of messed up admission by Ben. Humanize the slaves? Why would that be necessary if people saw them as their fellow man?
reinforce that by making it harsher and more difficult. And that's why actually one of the things I enjoy doing in terms of how I study the Bible, for example, is I like to look at contemporaneous religious texts of the time. So I like to study the Bible alongside, for example, Hammurabi's Code. And it's really interesting to notice the differences and where the Bible is liberalizing Hammurabi's Code, for example.
Absolutely.
And so the idea...
Oh, you mean Hammurabi's Code that was like totally copied in the Bible? Because it obviously existed before that, because there were totally other religions that existed before Christianity that predate Judaism and Christianity, like Zoroastrianism. And the myth of Jesus and the virgin birth totally predates that. And tons of societies have flood myths that predate Noah's Ark.
That a divine revelation has to be given to human beings who are capable of following that in the time.
Which humans totally could. And to his point, which Ben has not answered, there could have totally been a commandment that said, thou shalt not own slaves. And there wasn't. And his point stands that our society probably would have been better, especially if you're going to subscribe to what Ben is saying here, that religious texts and commandments are followed by society, and that's a necessary thing for a functioning society. Then he would have to agree that a society would be better if it outright was forbidden in the Bible, but it's not. And saying that oh, it's just human nature or humans have always owned slaves is putting the cart before the horse, because guess who created humanity in your religious text? It was God. So God could have created humans to not have the human nature to own each other, which I don't think is just based on human nature. I think it was a byproduct of a very violent and subversive age where people were uneducated and science was very primitive and the murder rate was much higher and lifespans were much lower and bigotry was a lot more prevalent. And I think as society has advanced, we see less and less of this. Go figure, right? I don't want to say correlation equals causation, but it seems to me that the more atheism, the more atheists there are, the less religiosity there is, the less religious people are, the more people that are leaving the church, the lower the murder rate has been, the less violent society has become, and the more educated the general populace has become, and the more literate the general populace has become. Just look at countries that are fundamentally atheist and how low their levels of violence are and how high their literacy rates are, like Sweden and Norway and other European countries, the IKEA countries. Is it a coincidence? I don't think so.
Again, that's part of the difficulty of I think, rebutting religion in a certain sense, because, again, it seems wiggly, but it really isn't, in the sense that if you believe, as I do, in a God who spoke to human beings in some form or fashion, and has to speak to them on a level that they can understand, in ways they can understand, then that immediately is going to discount the ability to do a lot of very radical things that would have appeared radical in 1200 BC, but now appear to be commonplace for us.
Yes, I understand this argument, and I've heard it many times. I must say that it seems strange to me that God does seem willing to completely and utterly condemn a bunch of other practices, including, by the way, imaginary crimes like witchcraft, just done away with entirely. And even if it is the case that God, for some reason, couldn't even hint at the idea that maybe eventually we should be moving towards the abolition of the idea of owning human beings as private property, he just had to condone
at it, but yes.
I still think it's the case that he would not permit a flat immorality, and I think you would agree with that too. And so when I open the Old Testament, and even if it is the case that God, for some reason, couldn't even hint at the idea that maybe eventually we should be moving towards the abolition of the idea of owning human beings as private property, he just had to condone
at it. But
cite a verse then. Where did God hint at it? And why hint at it? When has God ever been so subtle. This guy makes commandments. He doesn't hint at things. Jeez, Ben.
But yes.
I still think it's the case that he would not permit a flat immorality, and I think you would agree with that too. And so when I open the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, and when I look at the texts saying that if you lay siege to a city, you can kill, if the Lord delivers it into your hand, you can kill the men and the women, you can kill the men and keep the women and the children and the
Specifically the young women who are virgins. That's messed up. It says specifically that the spoils of war are going to be the young women, because basically God is saying you can pre-order them. They're going to age up into being of age to have sex with eventually, and they'll be untainted by other men, which is so screwed up, because it's like, well, how did those young girls and women feel about the situation? Are we not considering their feelings? Of course not, because the Bible is misogynistic and sexist, but I'm preaching to the choir, obviously.
And the livestock as plunder, as Deuteronomy says, and in the very next verse, the very next chapter says that, if you see a good-looking woman, and I'm not interjecting that, if somebody finds an attractive woman,
Yes, Isha Yafat is the actual Hebrew, yeah.
then they can take
Who gives a shit about the actual Hebrew, Ben? Come on. I'm sorry. I was rude,
them for themselves, and if they want them
but nobody gives a
with
shit.
their wives, and they take them home, they shave their head, they cut off their fingernails, they give them 30 days to mourn their old husband, who you may very well have just killed, and then you can take them as your wife. When Numbers 31 has Moses instruct the slaughter of the Midianites, saying, kill all the men, and this time the women get killed too, but not the women who haven't slept with a man.
Yeah, not the young women who are virgins. Of course, the implication being, how do you tell that? And there is a way to tell, but it's violating their privacy, obviously. But women were second or sometimes third or fourth class citizens in biblical times, because it was a Stone Age, and that's just the society that God was talking to, right? You have to talk to these misogynistic idiots on a language that they'll understand.
Why might that be? And it says that, keep them for yourselves. And I hear all the time that this is some kind of liberalizing process. Maybe it's because, these people wouldn't survive on their own. It's some kind of protective measure to make sure that you're looking after them. If that's the case, then why does it only apply to the virgins? That seems a little bit suspect to me.
See, my advice to Alex, as if he needs advice from me, but my advice to him would be just stop right there. Make Ben respond to that point, because it's a freaking great point. But he's going to continue, and then I feel like it's giving Ben the opportunity to ignore the excellent point that he just made.
It's sort of Scripture's littered with these kinds of
Well,
problems.
again, so to go back to the sort of oral tradition nature,
And I don't think
of what
God
I'm saying-
would permit a proactive immorality, even if he can't, for some reason, abolish the practice altogether. If you see what I'm saying.
No, that last point I don't see. So when you say even if he can't abolish the practice altogether,
Which already
no,
I think he would be able to do.
Right.
Did you see that, though? Did you see how Alex made an additional point, and now Ben is responding to that last point rather than having to respond to the much more difficult to respond to point about the virgin girls? I think he's still winning this debate, but I would have liked to see maybe a little bit more control on just, okay, I'm going to make this one good point and then stop. But, he's a much better debater than I am. So maybe I shouldn't. I'm not being critical, just giving my personal opinion.
Right, so the question is whether he can or whether he can't. If he can't abolish the practice, then the idea of wooing people away from a particular type of sin through a gradualistic process is known throughout societies across human history. I mean, the gradualistic processes are the way that most things get done across human history. And by the way, the universal practice, unfortunately, up till today in many places in the world, is in fact the extreme version of what you're talking about. Raise everything, kill everyone. Right? That sort of stuff, unfortunately, does take place, even on planet Earth, even in the year 2023. And so the idea of a culture arising from the Bible that not only abolished slavery on its own shores, but then abolished slavery literally everywhere else, which is what Great Britain did. that, again, to separate that off from a tradition that also says that every human being is made in the image of God, right, which is the verse from Genesis, or that you have to treat the stranger well, right, which is repeated more than any injunction in the Bible, right? There are these traditions that are at war with each other inside the Bible, which is why there is this hotly fought kind of argument inside biblical circles about all of this stuff, which again is one of the reasons why I said right up top that when it gets to I can't just open the Bible and interpret the text as I would see fit. You say, well, I don't like this verse right here.
Contradictory?
What was that?
You say that Scripture is contradictory?
Well, I say that Scripture is, some Scripture is time-bound and some Scripture is not. So the easy one, the sort of easy way to distinguish is that when the Bible says not to do a thing, then that tends to be non-time-bound.
And when it says to do a thing?
And when it says to do a thing, that may be a temporary permission structure, but it could also be a wooing. And by the way, again, I'm not speaking out of turn here. This has been 1,500 years of Jewish reinterpretation of Esha Yifat Toar, to take a quick example, right? The War Bride, the long-standing Talmudic tradition, which again is almost 2,000 years old at this point, is that was deliberately an attempt to avoid mass war rape, which again, you can scoff at that, but mass war rape happened on this continent 70 years ago when the Russians literally raped everyone as they came into Germany. So these evils continue to exist in the human heart.
Even if this was a liberalizing force, and even if this was not as bad as other slavery, do you think that the ownership of other human beings under the conditions of the Hebrew Bible are immoral?
Yes.
So how do you account for God commanding something which you now see to be, or rather permitting something and explicitly and giving you details about how to do something which is proactively immoral?
Because he's not permitting me, permitting my great to
do something immoral.
To do something
immoral.
That in the time was not considered immoral.
It wasn't considered immoral,
right.
But was it immoral?
By today's standards that were developed by the
relativist?
Judeo-Christian tradition, sure. By today's standards developed under the Judeo-Christian.
Oh, snap. Dang, that was good. Man, that was good. I think Ben is just getting spanked here.
Tradition, immoral.
So
which, by the way, you're living off the, you're again, not to get back to the Tom Holland argument, you're living off the remains of this. I mean, where's your morality coming from?
But who's the moral relativist now? I mean,
if you want me to react to the Jordan Peterson versus Alex O'Connor debate next, like this video and share it with somebody if you can. Send somebody the link. I'm trying to get to 9,000 subs so then I can say it's over 9,000.
I mean, it seems that a moment ago you say that the great success of religion is providing a sort of untouchable moral basis that sort of transcends human affairs and human debates. And now when I say, well, look at this, open your own religious scripture and look at this blatant immorality, you say, yeah, but well, that was considered to be fine at the time. It's considered to be bad now by the progress of Judeo-Christian
there's a question.
Who's the moral relativist here?
Well, it's not relativistic to say that a thing that is wrong today is considered wrong today because of a tradition that developed over time.
The question I'm asking is not, was it considered right or wrong at the time of biblical slavery?
It was wrong.
Was it wrong?
It was wrong then to hold a slave. Yes, it was wrong then to hold a slave, obviously.
It's like he said, who's the moral relativist now? What about your moral absolutes? If it was wrong, why wasn't there a commandment against it? And if it was wrong, then you seem to disagree with God because God either thought it was okay, maybe he didn't think it was right. He either thought it was right or thought it was okay, or he didn't want to buck the societal trend because according to Ben, humans just can't help but own slaves, even though he doesn't own any slaves. I don't. Nobody in my chat does. Nobody watching this video has ever owned a slave. But if it I feel like you just lost this debate, Ben. If this debate has just been on topic, you certainly lost that exchange.
And also, if you are God and you are pragmatically attempting to woo people away from slavery, was it a practicable thing?
Did you hear Ben stuttering during that too? That was so enjoyable for me. I really enjoyed that because this whole debate, he's had this sort of smug attitude, like this is not meant to be like a debate is supposed to be an argument. You can be cordial with somebody and still disagree with them. But there's been this jokey attitude that I really dislike. Because Ben, let's not forget that this dude is a huge bigot, transphobe, and a homophobic, devout Jew. And he's also said a bunch of racist stuff during the whole Black Lives Matter movement controversy. He had a bunch of bad takes then. He had bad takes that even his own, I did a video about this, his own commenters, even on the right, disagreed with him when he did a video criticizing the guy that unalived the CEO of that insurance company. That was a across the aisle unanimous, people were in unanimous agreement of saying F that guy. Nobody cared that happened to him. I think the agreement was it's unfortunate that somebody lost their life and it's unfortunate for his family, but nobody was going to feel sad for that person because of how many people have had a personal experience with a family member not getting insured by companies like that and then losing their life. It seemed like some sort of karma or retribution because that person represented a much larger societal anger towards these insurance companies. It wasn't about the individual, it was about the person. And Ben went on a tirade complaining about people praising the murder. Nobody was praising the murder of this guy. People were joking and talking about how they had very little sympathy for this person comparatively to the people who lost their life by not getting insured. And even his commenters were like, Ben, you're wrong on this one, like, which was pretty funny.
You simply, quote unquote, abolish slavery, or
here's an idea, for
religious
example.
tradition?
In the book of Exodus, God says, I think in chapter 21, maybe 22, says that if you have a Hebrew slave, you are to let them go after 7 years. If that Hebrew slave comes to you with a wife, then after the 7 years, you let them go too. If you give the Hebrew slave a wife and they have children, then after those 7 years are up, you give the man a choice. He can go after the 7 years, as per, but you keep his children and
exactly
his wife. Or, and here the scripture says, if he says, I love my wife, I love my kids, and my master, as if that's going to be one of the principal considerations, then he can stay with you, at which point you take him outside, you pierce his ear like cattle, and he becomes your property for life. Now, here's a suggestion, for example.
And assumingly, you can bequeath that slave to your children, because the Bible also says that your slaves are your property and your children inherit your slave. So even if you die, the slave doesn't go free if you have children.
If it was already established that Hebrew slaves go after 7 years, and it's already established that if they come with a wife, they can go after 7 years, then if I give them a wife and they have children, would it not be, it doesn't seem to me particularly revolutionary. It doesn't seem to me the kind of thing that would have caused such social discohesion that God just couldn't have found a way to do it, to say, well, why not let the whole family go free after those 7 years? With the knowledge beforehand that if you give this Hebrew slave of yours a wife and children, they'll get to leave with them. That seems to me, for example, a minor improvement that would not cause this kind of revolutionary earth-shifting, he couldn't have just gotten away with slavery. Maybe that's true. But something as obvious as this to me, it seems that if that is the case, that could have easily been done, then the failure to do so and the keeping of that Hebrew wife and their children as the master's property, that itself becomes an immorality that is dictated.
If I agree with your premises, I agree with your conclusion. I think that the question,
which you would have to. So you're conceding that he just basically won that exchange. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm seeing like 2 or 3 points for Alex and a big fat goose egg for Ben, who has failed to engage with the topic of the debate and who has been shown to be a horse's ass on all direct questions or just dodged them. So as far as I'm concerned, Alex is destroying him.
as to how much social discohesion would it have caused to do a thing, is an open question. I think the other question that
How much social discohesion does slavery cause, dude? Come on now. You little rascal, Ben.
that sort of remains open here is the incentive structure as to whether you accept a wife from your master, Right. So I don't want to get into the abstruse. I mean, we can do this
And we
literally
need to-
all day.
we need to
they're-
step from the past into
I mean,
the future
there's 70
anyway,
volumes
so-
of the Talmud that are literally about this sort of stuff, and then copious writings in terms of reinterpretation.
Yeah,
of
we're
this sort
hardly
of
the
stuff.
first people to talk about
Yeah,
this.
exactly.
Yeah.
This is not the first time these questions have come up. But I think the general point is sort of one where
I feel like when Ben gets uncomfortable, he wants to flex his knowledge of the Torah and of Judaic text. You know what I mean? Like no one cares, Ben. No one's impressed.
that we can dive into that full time, and you can spend your life becoming a rabbi, which enjoy.
happen. Could happen.
Could you,
Never
you
say
have, you
never.
have the beard for it. It's
I know Ben's never going to see this video, and that this is past. I'm talking to a past tense person, but can you stop with the jokey attitude and engage with the actual subject matter of the debate? Thank you. God.
your beard is further along than mine, or we can sort of stipulate at the top that there are certain biblical interpretations that are abstruse and difficult, and that has been a reality of religious life since the beginning.
Well, I can agree with that.
So
that's
we need to
certainly true.
we need to step from the past into the future through this conversational portal that we've got available to us. Obviously, everyone at this table would agree that holding a slave is wrong, in the same way that the man you kept talking about, who you thought was coming to kill you, we would all agree that that's a problematic thing. And it does seem. So I'm not going to get you to defend this, because I want you to come up with another game show where you solve the future problems of society for us, Alex. It does seem that on an atheist worldview, it is difficult ultimately to say what is good, what is right, what is wrong, but we
It's really not. I did it earlier without any difficulty.
can be practical about it, we can be functional about it. So come on then, for the future, give us some practical secular philosophies that can really help to build social cohesion for the future. You've got about a minute to do that, then we'll give Ben a minute to respond,
Well,
and then we'll wrap up.
I can provide an answer that I don't think will be cause of further debate, which is to say,
That'd be shocking.
Yeah.
I think everything that I've heard you say, Ben, on this subject, and everything that I think you may be about to say, not everything, but some of it, involves saying that, look, what we need to do.
I mean, the very simple answer is secular humanism, right? I mean, personally, I've said before that I think humanism is boring. It just is. But I'm going to answer this question. So, humanism, a focus on human dignity, empathy, the fact that people that have functioning empathy mirror neurons can empathize with other people or sympathize with them, or both. Human rights, especially, and as a priority for the people of marginalized groups that have historically not had those rights or have had lesser of those rights, should be first in line. Those are secular philosophies that will help societal cohesion. Utilitarianism, pragmatism. I'm a pragmatist. I think focusing on the logistics of improving society in a pragmatic and realistic way, and not idealism, is another example. Social safety nets, more social safety nets, the social contract that people have with each other. Like, I saw a great example. If you guys have never seen the channel on YouTube, it's called Channel 5 News. I think with Andrew Callahan is his name. Is a great channel. This guy does like really good, like on the ground journalism. Like he went, well, they sent one of their people to the LA riots recently, and he has a video where he goes to O Block. If you don't know what O Block is, it's literally probably the most dangerous apartment complex in the United States. Certainly the most in Chicago, because it's like one of the centralized locations where there have been so many gang-related shootings and deaths in Chicago. They call it Chirac because the murder rate was like equal to or higher than Chirac during the height of the Iraq War. And he went there and was talking to these people. And at the end of the video, he takes all of them to a White Sox game. And there's a guy who is in the sand. He's in the stands, and somebody has to get past him. So he stands up and moves out of the guy's way, and he says, "See, you look at that. Like, there's an example of a nonverbal communication where he didn't have to ask me to move out of his way. It was just implied, and I did it because he's a fellow human being, and I want to help him get to where he's going. And so I'm willing to cause myself a slight amount of discomfort in order to help him out, because I think fundamentally humans want to help each other, right? I know I do. I like helping people. I hope my videos help people with at least some form of entertainment. And that's the social contract, right? That unspoken agreement that hopefully we all share. And you don't need God for that. There's no requirement of any type of holy text or bigoted book that says you need to throw rocks at gay people until they die. We just fundamentally are a social or a eusocial species. That's how we evolved, and it's ingrained in us. And that's how you use secular philosophy to better society. So that's my answer.
Is encourage strengthening family and having children and not doing drugs and all of this kind of stuff, which people, like you say, have traditionally, this has been somewhat the prerogative of the church to maintain. I think that people just don't believe in God anymore, and so what I would say is just to encourage those things without the God. The question I would leave, and I'm sorry, I've just promised no debate, but here's something. Look, suppose it's the case that I agree wholesale with your proposition that religion is good and maybe even necessary for society in some way, right? Suppose I just say that that's true. I don't believe it's true. I've tried, I'm sorry, I just don't believe it. And so, I'm now left with a choice here. I don't think it's true, but I become convinced that it's somehow useful or beneficial. What am I to do with this information? You can't just choose to believe in God. People say you can choose to act as though you believe in God. That's kind of true until something really testing comes along. If you don't really believe it in your heart, you will falter at the first opportunity. How am I to raise my children? Am I to lie to them? Am I to say, well, I don't believe in any of this nonsense, but because I think it, promotes a sort of non-replacement, birth rate, then I'm just going to bring them up believing things that I think are false. I don't think this can happen. It's amazing how quickly ostensible deontologists transform before our very eyes into utilitarians on this question, that outgo the idea of being, truthful and being honest and talking about things that you think are philosophically sound. Now it's essentially faith-based, and it's about trying to make as many people, the greatest good for the greatest number across society and societal cohesion, even if you think it's false. In other words, I'm someone who is an atheist. I don't believe it's true. If I just grant everything you've said about the utility that religion provides, what am I to do?
So let me ask.
You've got about 30 seconds.
So it really it's a quick question, which is, do you know it's not true, or do you not believe that it's true?
I don't believe that it's true.
You believe that it's not true, or you don't believe that it's true?
I believe that it's not true.
You believe that it's not true in a full fashion.
Let's say that's the case, yeah.
Right.
Knowledge is a subset of belief, so it's irrelevant, and you're wasting time.
Right. So if you believe that, then obviously I think that you're wrong in the sense that, as I said,
which is already implied before the debate ever started, Ben. Jesus.
Right at the outset, I think that a lot of atheists are more religious than religious people. Religious people constantly admit to doubts and problems in interpretation and all the rest of this sort of
Boo! You stink. This guy stinks.
stuff. I don't think that a true religious believer can be truly religious without experiencing those doubts, because you're taking a leap of faith right off the top. And what I would normally say to somebody who is not fully committed to disbelief, I would say, is that you'd be in the position of being able to say to your kid, I don't know if it's true or not, which I think is a more honest answer,
yes,
by the way. I think that is something that you can teach your kids. You can say, here's an atheist perspective.
No, I know that Noah's Ark didn't happen. I know that Adam and Eve weren't real because we know how humans evolved, or we know that humans did evolve. So there are lots of claims of the Bible that I can say that I know are not true. And I know that the Bible and all other holy books were written by men. So you're just flat out wrong on this one, Ben. I'm sorry. And even if, if we say that we don't know that it's not true, I'm certainly leaning towards thinking that's not true. and you're going to tell your kid what you think, and what you say to them likely is going to have some impact because you're an authority figure to them. So it matters that you take a side.
Here's a religious perspective. I don't know what's true. I can provide you evidence on my side why I don't believe it fully, but there are people who provide evidence on the other side and arguments on the other side that are not foolish, that are not out of the sky crazy, you know, like and make your own decision. I think that's the way that you would address that with a child. If you're
Did you do that with your own children, Ben, or did you take them to temple from the time that they were age 3? And did you strongly imply that you're going to be very disappointed with them if they don't live out their lives as Orthodox Jews? Because I kind of think that you're sort of pushing them in one direction. You know, why don't you practice what you preach?
somebody who believes in the social utility of religion but doesn't necessarily believe in the religion itself. I think giving the child the ability to choose that themselves by saying, I'm not sure, or by presenting both sides of the argument would not be a bad way to go. I mean, just in
You can be sure of what you believe and still allow them to come to their own decision.
terms of practical solutions. In terms of what I would say to better society, I have a much easier answer, which is I think that you should re-engage with your social institutions, including your church. I think that
Your church? What does that even mean? What does it mean? What is Alex's church then?
saying to people on an individual level, don't do drugs, study hard for your tests, get married before you have kids, get a job. Like it's easy to say that to people. And I think that without supporting social institutions that reinforce that nearly every day and make it part of the culture that surrounds you, it's very difficult for people to live that. And so I think that removing God as sort of the capstone of these institutions, the whole institution tends to fall apart. So on a practical level, if you get rid of God, the institution just ceases to exist, and you can yell as much as you want, but individuals are far less likely to provide the social reinforcement and social networks for support that actually create the bases of a good, fundamentally solid civilization than an individualist civilization in which all you can do is basically encourage someone to, quote unquote, do the right thing.
Amen. Well, the fact we've managed to keep Ben Shapiro within the 24 minutes is a miracle in itself, a miracle that Alex doesn't believe in.
All right. I've seen enough, but I actually do want to show this clip that I was talking about because I think that I'd like to let this guy speak his own words. So this is a really great video. Highly recommend checking this video out if you haven't seen it.
Guys, fucking drink to that. We are like the epitome of sperm. We are sperm at its best.
You're a philosopher.
I consider myself a philosopher, yes. You guys want to hear my whole philosophy?
Yes.
Oh, shit. Oh, yeah. You guys watching this? This is my philosophy. You just saw it happen. I didn't know that guy. I could not associate with him of any particle of my own being, but I let him go through. Because he's a fellow human being, you know. So his agenda, you got to consider that. And he wanted to go through. It wasn't like negatively imperative to me. So I let him through. That's what I think we should all do, you know. Try to fucking make it better for everybody, if you can. Different team might be the same team in the long run. We don't know. Might be different teams right now, could end up being on the same team, but, you know, right now, he's not on my team because I don't know who the hell he is, but we're both at the Sox game, so I guess we're not on the same team in that sense.
So is it me, or did that guy just sum up in like 30 seconds a better philosophy than this entire like 2 hours of debate we just watched? Yeah, check out, and please don't strike my video, Channel 5. I doubt that they care about people showing their video, but that's a great video. It's their most popular one, and I love that clip because I agree with the sentiment wholeheartedly. But yeah, we made it through the whole video. Thank you so much to the people who were hanging out with me in the chat. Because I don't know where all you guys are in time zones, but it's pretty late where I am. It's like 2 a.m. This is a late stream, but thank you guys for hanging out with me. I think Alex O'Connor won that debate completely. I would score him like 5-0. Like, I don't think Ben made any good points. I don't think he engaged with the questions. I don't think he engaged with the topic of the debate. And I think Ben, when he had the screws turned on him, really floundered. And so I give all the credit to Alex O'Connor. It's a great atheist channel, and I wish him congratulations on the success he's had with his channel. And if he sees this video, hey, I'd be happy to do a collaboration with you in some form. So thank you to the people in the side chat. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. I'm very close to 9,000 subscribers, and I want to reach that goal because that would just be awesome. I'm very close, so please subscribe if you haven't. And leave a comment if you're watching this video later. If you want to support my channel in a monetary way, you can check out my Patreon. It's patreon.com/atheistjr. I also have a Twitter, which is or X, Elon Musk. The less said about Elon Musk, the better. It's Twitter or x.com/atheistjr. And my PayPal is also at athiestjr. So yeah, enjoy the video, enjoy the stream, check out some of my other videos, and I'll just see you guys in the next one.